Chapter 315. Qin Wanru just walked in this direction, but she didn't know the way. After Yujie calmly asked several servant girls about it, she turned here. Standing at the gate of the courtyard and looking at the tall and empty courtyard, she felt a pain in her heart. Her hand fell on the handle of the gate weakly. The slender figure and the tall figure in her mind seemed to be in front of her. The feeling of intertwining together made her tinnitus and dizzy, and she almost fainted. "Miss." Yujie was startled and hurried to reach out to hold her. After a long while, Qin Wanru raised her head with a pale face. Her face had always been ruddy, but now there was only a misty white. Her little face was as white as snow, without any trace of blood, and even the corners of her lips were only left with a touch of paleness. "I'm fine." Qin Wanru's eyes fell on the two ink buckets on the side. The ink in the big buckets was very thick, emitting a special smell of ink. Qin Wanru liked this smell in the past, but at this time, she felt a strong disgust. She took a deep breath and walked in slowly. She still had a doubt in her heart, a doubt that could not be solved. If this doubt was solved, many things would be integrated. She walked into the courtyard and saw the screen wall. She only took a glance at the screen wall before walking towards the main room on the opposite side of the wall. The door of the main room was tightly locked. Qin Wanru turned along the main room and stopped in a wing room on the side. Although the window was tightly closed, she saw a few words on the door. It was more like a study. She stood still and looked around, feeling more and more that this was a study. This kind of small study was usually used by the female master in the courtyard. On weekdays, she could read some books or write something. It was much more spacious than setting up a desk in her own room. "Yujie, can you unscrew the lock?" Qin Wanru looked at the tightly closed lock and said. "Let me try." Yujie said. She had always been very strong, but she had never unscrewed this lock. She took 2 steps forward, reached out to touch the lock, and suddenly said in surprise, "Miss, this lock is open." It's the same as Mingxiu Nun's. When Mingxiu Nun was afraid of being disturbed or didn't want to see others, she would put the lock and the chain on the doorknob, which seemed to lock the door. Unexpectedly, this place was also like this. He didn't know who did it. But no matter who did it, Qin Wanru benefited from it. He removed the chain and pushed the door open. An old smell rushed out of the door. Yujie wanted to stop Qin Wanru and ask her to wait for a while before going in. However, she found that she didn't pull Qin Wanru and Qin Wanru had already walked in. Everything in the room seemed to have been tidied up and placed neatly, as if it was a study that had never been used before. However, it was obvious that it had not been cleaned for a long time. There were rows of books on the shelves, and the books were covered with dust. He stepped in and smelled moldy. Everything in the room should have been arranged extremely elegantly, but now there was only gray. The once gorgeous curtains had long been left with some dark gray color, and the former beautiful style could no longer be seen. Qin Wanru bit her lip and suppressed the throbbing in her heart. She looked around and walked straight to a shelf in the middle of the room. The reason why that shelf was eye-catching was not because there were more books on it, but because it was close to a large desk. In the past, writing and painting would be directly placed on this shelf. The writing table had also been tidied up. The writing brushes, ink, paper, and inkstones were all put back in place as if they were brand new. It was just that they were brand new due to the dust. It looked more like an illusion for others to see. Walking to the bookshelf, Qin Wanru raised her head and took down a scroll of painting. In the painting, there was a handsome young man with a gentle smile. At first glance, Qin Wanru felt as if a lightning flashed across her heart, and some seemingly lost memories flashed faintly. He looked familiar, and there was a sense of familiarity coming from her heart. At this moment, her eyes turned red, her nose was sour, and her heart ached as if there was a big hole leaking. The memory of her childhood was too vague, and she could not remember anything. However, when she saw this face, she felt that she gradually had some impression. It was very shallow, like a faint watermark falling on the white paper. Although it was shallow, it was clear and eye-catching. That was, father. Was it the father in her memory? Tears fell down one by one. Qin Wanru subconsciously took the painting in her hand away from herself, for fear that her tears would fall on the paper and stain the painting on it. In 2 lives, did she finally find her father? Her eyes fell on the faintly familiar face of the man almost greedily. Even though she bit her lip tightly, she could not help sobbing. Others were loved by their biological parents, but she had never had one. Her fate was as floating as a duckweed. In the end, she was framed by Chu Luyue and Xiao Yenru and was beheaded. Originally, she thought that there was not much hatred between her and Xiao Yenru. Even if Xiao Yenru did not like her to be a widow, she would not care about such a small figure like her. As a high and mighty favorite concubine, how could she not let go of an existence like an ant? It turned out that all of this had long been calculated by others. In the last life, she had been living in a humble life. When she met others, she did not dare to raise her head, and even dared not answer loudly in a low voice. However, even in this situation, those people did not intend to let go of her. It turned out that she had been calculated by others and could only die. Even if she had not been cut in half at the waist that day, there were still many ways for her to die. They did not intend to give her a way to live. In vain, she had been trembling with fear and thought that as long as she seldom appeared in front of others, nothing would happen. As a favorite concubine, Xiao Yenru would not remember her. Miss, what's wrong with you? Seeing Qin Wanru crying, Yujie panicked and asked anxiously. Qin Wanru shook her head and wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes with a handkerchief. In this life, she had to be strong. A child without parents' love must be stronger, so that she could avenge herself and her parents. Crying, she had cried a lot in the last life. After shaking her head, she moved her eyes down. A seal with a pattern of orchid and grass, appeared at the bottom of the scroll, where the signature was. Her trembling hand touched the seal, which was very familiar. Miss, isn't this the one you have? Yujie's eyes also slid down along her trembling little hand, and she could not help screaming at this time. Yes, it's the one I have. Qin Wanru said slowly, and her voice was almost drifting. In the last life, she only saw the seal that she got from Madame D, the seal that she asked Chu Luchan to do for her. In the last life, she only saw it when Qin Yuru humiliated her. In this life, she had already taken it in her hands, so that Madame D and her daughter could not take it away in the way they did in the last life. This seal was really related to her life experience. Her watery eyes slid down and she saw a line of small words below, which indicated the year and date. She calculated the time and found that it was about 14 or 15 years ago. Qinghua was painted for her husband. These words were behind the year and date. Although they were just a few simple words, they made Qin Wanru feel like she had been hit hard. Qinghua. Infanta Qinghua, the only daughter of Rui, and great elder princess, the woman who gave birth to Hao, and died early. She was a very faint and delicate figure in her memory. Was that her mother? Sadness surged up uncontrollably again, but this time she gritted her teeth fiercely. If all this was true, someone in Duke Xing's mansion must have done it secretly, and this person was most likely the current Duke Xing and Madam of Duke Xing. They were the two people who benefited the most. It was impossible for Duke Xing to inherit the position of heir of Duke Xing, but because of the death of heir of Duke Xing, he became Duke Xing. With the memory of the last life, Qin Wanru did not believe that Duke Xing and Madam of Duke Xing were innocent. In the last life, no one knew when Hao had an accident and his whereabouts were unknown. Rui, and great elder princess, was so sad that she asked to cut her hair, and Qin Wanru was cut in half at the waist. All this showed that this matter was not simple or pure. She did not believe that there was no conspiracy. Her watery eyes were so cold that they were almost sinister, and the bloodthirsty coldness made Yujie involuntarily be careful. Looking at Qin Wanru, who was a little abnormal, she did not dare to say a word and only waited on her side carefully. Taking a deep breath, she suppressed the surging bloody hostility in her heart and closed her watery eyes slightly under her long eyelashes. After a long while, she opened her eyes and looked coldly at the scroll in her hand. Everything was perfect to let people understand what was the truth, but only she knew the truth, and no one would believe it if she told others. Everyone knew that the former heir of Duke Xing only had a posthumous son and no daughter. Where did this daughter of hers come from? No wonder Qin Yuru was treated very well in Duke Xing's mansion in the last life, but there was no change. Qin Yuru, who had reduced her age, should be more like the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing. The reason why she married late was that she was not late according to her reduced age, but in fact, she was late by 2 years. In this life, Madame D and her daughter began to plot the identity of this daughter again. This also explained the two most important questions. Madame D should know her background, or she should have guessed part of her background. Of course, this may also be the hint of Madame of Duke Xing and the result of some things she knew. Combining these things, Madame D could do such a bold thing. Qin Yuru reduced her age not to stop people from gossiping, but to be more like Madame D. The scars on her body today were also to make people doubt that she was not Madame D's biological daughter. Everything was perfect, so perfect that it was almost true. More importantly, Qin Wanru also got a more important fact from the series of plots of Madame D and her daughter and the behavior of Madame of Duke Xing. Chapter 316. Someone in Duke Xing's mansion should know that her biological parents had a daughter and had never given up investigating it secretly. Therefore, Madame of Duke Xing plotted against her again and again. In the last life, after she entered the palace, Madame of Duke Xing didn't have enough power, so her daughter, Xiao Yanru, was sent to kill her. It could be said that Madame of Duke Xing was very cruel and accurate. In this life, she would definitely find out the truth. There was no wall in the world that was impenetrable. She just wanted to catch their weakness from the wall of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Wanru slowly closed the scroll in her hand and put it back on the bookshelf. She turned around and walked out. Before she reached the door, she suddenly heard a sound coming from outside. It seemed that a large group of people came over. Qin Wanru pressed her hand on the door. Yujia understood and hurried to close the door. They stood in front of the window, gently pulled up a corner of the curtain, and looked out of the main window. Who dares to splash ink on it? Xiao Yuanhao's childish voice was very obvious. Although they couldn't see him in the crowd, it was obvious that he was among them. This is old Madame's idea. She said that she was afraid that she would think of. The servant girl in red said vaguely and didn't dare to say the name of the heir of Duke Xing's mansion. There was no heir of Duke Xing's mansion. Until now, no heir of Duke Xing had been conferred. Although first young master was the legitimate son and the eldest son of Duke Xing's mansion, there was no reply from the emperor. It was said that it was because of Rui and great elder princess's obstruction. Of course, this kind of thing was just hearsay. But she was clear that the title of the former heir of Duke Xing couldn't be casually called. Why did Grandma erase father's words? Grandma didn't come to see it. Why did she think of father when she saw it? Xiao Yuanhao shouted angrily. It was an accident that he came to Duke Xing's mansion today. Originally, Rui and great elder princess intended that Madame of Duke Xing adopted a daughter. With her identity, why should she come to support? Naturally, she wouldn't come. Sending someone to send a gift was enough to give Madame of Duke Xing face. Unexpectedly, Xiao Yuanhao found out about it and insisted on coming. Rui and great elder princess had no choice but to send 2 trusted old maids to come with him. After Xiao Yuanhao arrived at Duke Xing's mansion, he had been playing in the front yard and did not rush to the backyard. When the 2 servant girls went to tell him the secret, he happened to hear them and came over immediately. After that, Xiao Yuanhao came with a large group of servant girls and old maids from Rui and great elder princess's mansion. The 2 groups met at the gate. Xiao Yuanhao asked the 2 servant girls to use the ink bucket to erase his father's words. Then he asked someone to overturn the bucket on the spot. That was why there was such a huge commotion. At this time, the ink bucket had been overturned on the ground. Hao Yuanhao stood in the crowd and blocked the screen wall. He also asked the people of Ruian Great Elder Princess's mansion to block the people of Duke Xing's mansion from coming forward. Although they were in a remote place, someone had already reported to Madame of Duke Xing when Xiao Yuanhao came over with a large group of people. They had just talked for a few minutes when Madame of Duke Xing came over with her people in a hurry. She had been talking with some noble madams. At this time, after apologizing to those madams, she left the banquet and came over in a hurry. Several madams followed her calmly and stayed far behind Madame of Duke Xing. As soon as Madame of Duke Xing entered the courtyard, she heard Xiao Yuanhao's words and hurried to coax him. How, this is your grandmother's decision. Just listen to her. After erasing it, second aunt will ask someone to paint it white. At that time, How, can practice calligraphy on it. I don't want it. I want my father's words. Xiao Yuanhao pushed Madame of Duke Xing away and shouted. His eyes turned red. Because of the arrival of Madame of Duke Xing, the crowd made way for them. Qin Wanru happened to see Xiao Yuanhao's look clearly, and there was a touch of pain in her eyes. This was her younger brother, her only bloodline, and her closest relative. They were the closest of kin. In his previous life, the two of them had never met each other. The two of them had long since fallen into the hands of others who fought for power and profit. Madame of Duke Xing did not expect that Xiao Yuanhao would push her and almost fell. Her principal servant girl Lu Qing hurried to help her, and then she staggered and stood firm. After standing firm, her face darkened and she asked, How, are you obedient or not? How, I don't want to be obedient. I want my father's words. I don't want to write. I only want my father's words. Xiao Yuanhao cried loudly and waved his hands randomly. He did not allow anyone to approach him, and Madame of Duke Xing had to stay far away from him. Come on, Master Hao is crying like this. Take him away. A trace of disgust flashed in Madame of Duke Xing's eyes, but she pretended to be concerned. Nanny Sheng hurriedly walked out and was about to carry Xiao Yuanhao away. Master Hao, come with me. The two servants have found the two crickets that you liked last time. Master Hao, let's go and have a look. I heard that they are very powerful. The crickets of other people can't beat them. I don't want them. I don't want crickets. I only want my father's words. Hao, cried loudly and reached out to push Nanny Sheng. Hao, if you are not obedient, I will ask Grandma to lock you up. Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened, and then she winked at Nanny Sheng. Nanny Sheng understood and grabbed Xiao Yuanhao's hand, while coaxing, Master Hao, don't cry. Go and talk to old Madam. Maybe old Madam will feel sorry for you. Xiao Yuanhao hesitated. Madame of Duke Xing was angry, and he seemed to be a little timid. He looked at Madame of Duke Xing with his big tearful eyes, and then looked at the screen wall behind him. After all, he was a child. After being scared by Madame of Duke Xing, he seemed to want to compromise. An old maid standing behind Xiao Yuanhao suddenly took 2 steps forward and gave Nanny Sheng 2 hard slaps on her face. Nanny Sheng was squatting, so she was slapped and fell to the ground. How dare you? Where did you come from? How dare you touch Master Hao? No one expected this. Madame of Duke Xing stared at the old maid with a livid face. She didn't dare to refute Rui and Great Elder Princess, but she still dared to hit an old maid. How dare you? This is Duke Xing's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing said harshly. The old maid looked at Madame of Duke Xing calmly and bowed sideways. I know you are Madame of Duke Xing, but our princess has ordered that no one in Duke Xing's mansion is allowed to touch the little master. If anything happens to the little master, the whole Duke Xing's mansion will be responsible. Our Infanta has passed away. He is our princess's only flesh and blood, the royal bloodline. No one can touch him as they like. Her words were impolite and almost pointed out that Madame of Duke Xing could not touch Xiao Yuanhao. If this was said by others, Madame of Duke Xing would slap them on the spot. But it was said by Rui and Great Elder Princess, and the so-called royal bloodline was not wrong. Xiao Yuanhao's mother was Infanta Qinghua, so he was the royal bloodline. You are just a servant. Madame of Duke Xing's face darkened. Since I am just a servant, I was asked by our Great Elder Princess from the palace. I used to serve the Empress Dowager. The old maid raised her head and said proudly. Her words shocked everyone present. No one felt strange that Rui and Great Elder Princess had a nanny from the palace, but Xiao Yuanhao also had a nanny from the palace. It could be seen that Rui and Great Elder Princess cared about Xiao Yuanhao. She didn't treat Xiao Yuanhao as her grandson, but as her grandson. What was more, this old maid was the Empress Dowager's servant. For this reason, although Madame of Duke Xing was noble, she could not yell at the Empress Dowager's servant. In other words, even if the old maid of the Empress Dowager slapped Nanny Sheng for no reason, she could only admit that she was unlucky and slapped in vain. Could it be that he could fight back? It was not only Rui and Great Elder Princess's face, but also the Empress Dowager's face. The madams who came with Madame of Duke Xing looked at each other. Was Rui and Great Elder Princess really going to take the child away? It was unreasonable. After all, Xiao Yuanhao's surname was Xiao, and his father was the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion. If he really followed Rui and Great Elder Princess, Duke Xing's mansion would be disgraced, and people would say that they couldn't tolerate a child without parents' love. This kind of thing could be big or small, and it was related to the royal family. The madams just wanted to see what happened in Duke Xing's mansion, but they didn't expect to see such a thing. They stood at the gate of the courtyard in silence. It was better not to intervene in the royal affairs. Whoever intervened would be unlucky. It was strangely quiet in the courtyard. Qin Wanru saw Madame of Duke Xing's face turn blue and pale, and she was obviously trying to suppress her anger. Qin Wanru was relieved. With the protection of Rui and Great Elder Princess, it seemed that Xiao Yuanhao would not suffer losses today. Okay, I won't intervene in this matter. Anyway, it is old Madame's idea. Rui and Great Elder Princess can control but she can't control everything in our Duke Xing's mansion. Madame of Duke Xing was a little embarrassed. After saying angrily, she turned back with her servants, seeming that she didn't want to intervene in this matter anymore. Rui and Great Elder Princess was noble, but no matter how noble she was, she couldn't control everything in other people's mansion. If she couldn't brush the screen wall today, she would do it tomorrow. Since she planned to brush the screen wall, Madame of Duke Xing didn't believe that she couldn't do it. When Madame of Duke Xing left, the madams naturally followed her and left, leaving Rui and Great Elder Princess's servants and Xiao Yuanhao by the screen wall. Seeing Madame of Duke Xing leave, Xiao Yuanhao looked relaxed. He pulled the clothes of the old maid beside him and said confusedly, "Why does Grandma have to remove the screen wall of Father's writing? Isn't it better to keep it? Father also specially left a place for me. In the future, my writing should be with Father's." Hao-er's eyes turned red with grievance when he said this. Although he hadn't seen his biological father, he had always been proud of his biological father. Although he had never seen his biological father's face, it didn't prevent him from thinking of his father. His maternal grandmother said that his father was a very powerful person, and he was definitely not the incompetent father his grandmother said. Chapter 317. I don't know what old Madame of Duke Xing is thinking. The old maid sighed in a low voice and squatted down to wipe Xiao Yuanhao's tears with a handkerchief. Grandma doesn't like Father, does she? Xiao Yuanhao blinked his big black and white eyes and suddenly said sensibly. Well, I don't know. Even though the old maid was sent by Rui and Great Elder Princess from Empress Dowager to serve Xiao Yuanhao, she couldn't say something carelessly. Grandma must not like Father. She said she liked Father before, but it's fake. Xiao Yuanhao didn't need the old maid's answer, so he asked and answered it himself. His big eyes were full of tears, and his long eyelashes fluttered. Tears were about to fall down, and he looked pitiful and sad. In his heart, his grandmother had always loved his father deeply and loved him dearly. Coming to such a conclusion, Xiao Xiao's heart was also very hurt, but he still stubbornly insisted on his own conclusion. It must be so, otherwise, his grandmother would not be so tough to erase the words on the shadow wall. The old maid sighed helplessly. She also felt strange. This screen wall had been here for so many years. Why did old madam think of erasing it now? It was a memory left by the former heir of Duke Xing, a memory for his relatives who missed him. Hao wants to keep this screen wall. Seeing such a well-behaved and pitiful Xiao Yuanhao, Qin Wanru couldn't help pushing open the door and walking out. Seeing Qin Wanru, Xiao Yuanhao shouted, "Sister," and ran to her. Qin Wanru hugged him and reached out to touch his head. She only felt that her heart was beating very fast and all the bitterness in her heart suddenly surged up. The sadness that she had tried so hard to suppress came back to her face. She almost couldn't help hugging Xiao Yuanhao and crying loudly. Qin Wanru looked at Xiao Yuanhao. But she clearly knew that it was not the best time. Without evidence to prove that she was Hao's sister, she couldn't act rashly. Hao, good boy, don't be sad. Reaching out to touch his hair, Qin Wanru comforted him softly. Sister, Grandma and second aunt want to erase father's words. I don't want to. Hao burst into tears, pointed at the screen wall on one side, and subconsciously complained to Qin Wanru, feeling extremely wronged. Hao, do you want to leave this screen wall? Qin Wanru squatted down and asked. Yes, Hao wants to keep this screen wall. Father left it for Hao. Although Xiao Yuanhao had been brought up to be ignorant, he knew that it was his father's legacy. No one could touch it or erase it. But the screen wall is in Duke Xing's mansion, and old Madam of Duke Xing's and Madam of Duke Xing's will cannot be decided by Hao. Now that you are here, it will not be erased, but what if you go back to Rui and Great Elder Princess Mansion? Qin Wanru frowned and said. If Hao were a little older, old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion could not ask Hao directly even if she wanted to. Xiao Yuanhao was stunned for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect this terrible fact. He was so anxious that his face turned pale. He held Qin Wanru's hand and said, Sister, what should we do? If Hao stayed here, would it not be erased? Hao won't go back to Grandma's place. Hao will stay here and guard this place. Wouldn't go back and stay here. Of course not. Qin Wanru would not let Xiao Yuanhao stay here. Duke Xing's mansion was too dangerous, and it was too easy to deal with a child who had not grown up yet. In the past, she just raised him to be disabled and tried to make him have an accident in front of Rui and Great Elder Princess. But now even the screen wall was erased, which meant that something had changed. In this case, it was extremely dangerous for Hao to stay here. Hao of course, you don't have to stay here. Rui and Great Elder Princess will be worried if you stay here. Qin Wanru coaxed him. The old maid beside her was relieved. She had thought that Qin Wanru would coax Xiao Yuanhao to stay here, and Rui and Great Elder Princess would definitely not agree. But what about father's screen wall? Hao pointed at the screen wall sadly. The characters on it were vigorous, which represented the man's fierce momentum. Qin Wanru bit her lips, suppressed the pain in her heart, and said with a smile, in fact, there is a way. Xiao Yuanhao's eyes lit up, Sister, what's the way? Hao's father was the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion, but now he is nothing. But if Hao can become the heir of Duke Xing's mansion now, then everything in Duke Xing's mansion will belong to Hao, and everything in this yard will also belong to Hao, and no one can touch it. Qin Wanru coaxed him. The position of Duke Xing's mansion belonged to her father. Now Duke Xing plotted to usurp her father's position, and also wanted to kill her and her brother. They succeeded in the last life, and in this life, she would definitely drag them to hell together. Everything originally belonged to Hao, so she would let everything go back to the right way. The position of heir of Duke Xing was still hanging in the air, and she would help Hao get it back. She didn't believe that Duke Xing knew nothing about what Madame of Duke Xing had done. Even Xiao Yanru knew it. If Duke Xing was alive, he must also know it. What's more, there were some things that even Madame of Duke Xing couldn't do, even if she was very capable. Men were in charge of external affairs, while women were in charge of internal affairs. Duke Xing's official career was very smooth in the last life, and he was not a simple person. Take Wang Yishu's matter as an example. Madame of Duke Xing was not the only one who could intervene in the palace. Hao can keep this screen wall if he becomes the heir of Duke Xing's mansion. Xiao Yuanhao's eyes lit up. Yes, he can. Qin Wanru nodded. Well, then I will be the heir of Duke Xing's mansion, and I won't give it to you. You can go to other places, and Duke Xing's mansion belongs to me. Xiao Yuanhao clapped his hands, became happy, and said in a childish way. Who is the heir of Duke Xing's mansion? Qin Wanru thought of something and asked. My heir is my heir, the heir of second uncle's family. Xiao Yuanhao tilted his head, blinked his big eyes, and said in a somewhat naive and ignorant manner. Seeing this, Qin Wanru felt more distressed. She reached out to touch Xiao Yuanhao's hair and said, Hao, go back and tell Grandma that you want to be the heir of Duke Xing's mansion and keep this screen wall. Rui, a great elder princess, must have a balance in her heart. She asked her to make a fuss, which could delay it, and old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion could not directly erase the screen wall. It was left by Hao's father, and also by her own father. Well, don't worry, sister. I will tell them now, and I will do what I say. Xiao Yuanhao nodded hard. Yes, Hao is a man, and he will do what he says. Qin Wanru nodded hard, and there was a touch of sadness in her eyes. If her father was still alive, she and Hao would not have to make such a plot, and they just wanted a part of what they deserved. Sister, then I will go back first. Sister, come to play with me next time. Xiao Yuanhao patted his small chest proudly, and he was very satisfied with Qin Wanru's praise. After saying that, he turned around and left. The old maid following him looked Qin Wanru up and down, bowed to Qin Wanru respectfully, and hurriedly ran after Xiao Yuanhao. The servants of Rui and great elder princess followed them out, leaving Qin Wanru and Yuchia in front of the high screen wall alone. Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at the words on the screen wall. Her watery eyes were misty, and she looked at the words in front of her silently, almost piously. Why did you do this? Footsteps came from behind, and then it was Wen Shiqi's voice. He just followed Qin Wanru into the yard, and then saw Qin Wanru at the door absent-mindedly. At that time, Qin Wanru was immersed in her own sadness. So she did not notice Wen Shiqi at the door with his deep eyes. After hearing the voices, Wen Shiqi hid behind the house with his servant, and also saw the scene just now. Seeing that other people had left, he walked out slowly, stopped a few steps away from Qin Wanru, and looked Qin Wanru up and down with gloomy eyes, as if it was the first time he saw Qin Wanru. Is it strange? Qin Wanru looked back at Wen Shiqi, and asked with cold eyes, as if she was not surprised by Wen Shiqi's appearance. It is very surprising. Does it have anything to do with you? Why do you want to stir up chaos in Duke Xing's mansion? Wen Shiqi's eyes were a little aggressive. What Qin Wanru said to Xiao Yuanhao was clearly heard by Wen Shiqi. Shouldn't it be hers? Qin Wanru turned her head and continued to look at the high screen wall, and said bitterly. But the former heir of Duke Xing has died, and now Duke Xing has his own son. First young master is a talented and knowledgeable person, not a playboy. Isn't it enough to be the heir of Duke Xing? Wen Shiqi analyzed slowly in a low voice. So what? Qin Wanru raised her head with a little arrogance and said. Why do you want to stir up trouble in Duke Xing's mansion? Wen Shiqi asked with a serious look. Does it have anything to do with third young master Wen? Qin Wanru was a little angry inexplicably. Although she did not look back, her voice was already unfriendly. You know it's useless to say this. It's not that easy for Xiao Yuanhao to be the heir of Duke Xing. Then why should we let him cause such a ruckus? Wen Shiqi answered with a hidden meaning. The current Duke Xing's mansion was not the Duke Xing's mansion in the past. The first young master of Duke Xing's mansion was the legitimate heir, and also the one who was recognized by everyone. Compared with him, Xiao Yuanhao had no chance to win at all. Not only was he small, but he also did not have a good reputation. Moreover, the former heir of Duke Xing was just an heir, and he did not become Duke Xing. Xiao Yuanhao had no reason to fight for it, and it was just like a farce. So what? Hao Er's grandmother is Rui, and great elder princess, and he is the only grandson of Rui, and great elder princess. Qin Wanru curled her lips and said coldly. This was a forceful fight with Duke Xing's mansion, and it was with the help of Rui, and great elder princess. In fact, everyone knew that for so many years, the first young master of Duke Xing's mansion had not been able to inherit the position of heir of Duke Xing because of Rui, and great elder princess's interference. This was also the important reason why Duke Xing's mansion and Rui, and great elder princess's mansion seemed to be harmonious on the surface, but they were actually not. Wen Shiqi should not like this kind of bullying. In the past, when he saw this kind of thing, he would occasionally intervene. But at this moment, he felt speechless. Looking at the back of Qin Wanru's raised head and slender back, he shook his head helplessly and returned to the previous topic. What does it have to do with you? No matter how fierce the fight between Rui, and great elder princess and Duke Xing's mansion is, it has nothing to do with you, right? You are just the daughter of a minor official of the third rank. This was to remind Qin Wanru that the endless fight between Duke Xing's mansion and Rui, and great elder princess's mansion had nothing to do with her, and she might even become the victim of the fight between the two giants. Chapter 318. Since Qin Wanru met Wen Shiqi, she had been very polite and had an inexplicable closeness with him. Even when Wen Shiqi suspected her later, she just consciously distanced herself from him instead of deliberately distancing herself from him. But now she looked at Wen Shiqi with such a look, which made Wen Shiqi very uncomfortable. He coughed in a low voice and said, "Do you think it's necessary? There are things I can do and things I can't do. I just can't bear to see someone plot against Hao Er." Qin Wanru said with a serious face and even a little alert in her eyes. At this moment, she didn't look like a little girl who was unsophisticated, but like an old woman who had experienced vicissitudes of life, stubbornly guarding the firmness in her heart. No matter how much she had to pay, she would not hesitate and even had a sense of cutting off all means of retreat. Wen Shiqi was silent. He had always been good at talking, but at this moment, he found that he had nothing to say. He could only watch Qin Wanru slowly disappear in his sight with Yujie. It was a very uncomfortable feeling, as if there was something that used to be something, but now slowly faded in his palm and then disappeared in the air. His handsome eyebrows were tightly locked. Had he seen the girl in front of him before? Where did she go? In the gorgeous palace, the handsome young man leaned on the couch with a simple white robe draped over his shoulders. There was a heater in the room, which was as warm as spring. Maybe it was a little hot. The toggle and loop buckle on his chest was not completely buckled, revealing his thin collarbone. With his long hair casually hanging down, he was as beautiful as a person in a painting. However, his words were filled with unhappiness. I heard that Madame of Duke Xing is going to adopt a daughter and she has lived in Qin's mansion before. All the people of Qin's mansion have gone to congratulate her. Xiao Xuanzi put the flowers on the tea table in front of him and said with a smile. Adopting a daughter has caused so many troubles. It's not true. Chu Luchen said with a faint and beautiful smile. This may be because of the thing in the palace. Xiao Xuanzi said meaningfully. Duke Xing really thinks that others don't know. He thinks others are fools. Chu Liuchen's voice was light with a bit of evil. It was completely different from his handsome performance. Except for the prince, maybe no one knows. Xiao Xuanzi said cautiously. Chu Liuchen leaned back and said leisurely, let him be. It's better than nothing, so that they won't keep staring at me. Master, they can't make trouble now. Look, they are all injured. Xiao Xuanzi laughed. Isn't this better? We have to let him show his talents. He can't always hide behind us. It seems that we are the only ones who are making a fuss. Chu Liuchen chuckled and looked relaxed. Some were hiding while others were invisible. There were plenty of people who wanted to profit from the fight. Jiang Yi had to dig them out slowly. He wasn't in a hurry and wanted to take his time. You're right. I'm already injured to this extent. I can't be injured for nothing. Xiao Xuanzi smiled apologetically. Others didn't know how those princes got hurt, but his master, who looked sick and weak, actually knew it long ago. No, I can't say that I know. It should be a long time ago. His master intervened. Prince Zhou couldn't escape the suspicion that something like this happened at the gate of the palace. Although Prince Yu wasn't directly involved, it must be Prince Yu. Prince Yu was directly involved, but the one who benefited the most was definitely Prince Yu. As for the youngest Prince Xian, he was not serious in the past. He always played with cats and dogs. At first glance, he was just a child who had not grown up. But did the royal family really have children who had not grown up? The Empress Dowager and the Emperor were angry, and these princes couldn't get any evidence. If they couldn't find any evidence, the best way was that they were also harmed. Even if this matter was related to them, it wouldn't be a big deal. That's why there was such a self-directed and self-acted assassination. I just took advantage of the situation and pushed the boat a little. This matter ended up like this. It seemed that when several princes were in trouble, the person who was most likely to benefit from it would surface, a person who no one thought in the past. I was injured because of that girl. I still can't get up now. How dare she go to congratulate others? Why doesn't she come to see me? Chu Liuchen suddenly became a little angry. His face darkened and he looked unhappy. Master, you are in the palace, and you are a man. Even if second Miss Qin wants to see you, it's not convenient. Besides, she has no right to directly enter the palace to deliver the memorial. Xiao Xuanzi explained with a smile. She has to have an identity, right? Chu Liuchen curled his lips slightly and said thoughtfully. It's best to have an identity. The identity of second Miss Qin's mansion is still too low. What do you think of the Empress Dowager? Xiao Xuanzi said in a low voice as he secretly looked at his master's eyebrows. Although the Empress Dowager thought second Miss Qin was good, she should look down on second Miss Qin's identity. Xiao Xuanzi thought that even if the Empress Dowager wanted to marry second Miss Qin to his master, she would only be a concubine or a concubine. According to the Empress Dowager's intention, she would definitely choose another daughter of lineal descent from a famous family. Why hasn't Imperial Grandmother come yet? Since the Empress Dowager was mentioned, Chu Liuchen paused and looked out of the window with his beautiful eyes. In the past, the Empress Dowager would always appear at this time, but she was a little late today. He still lived in the palace. This was the place where he lived before he moved out of the palace. Even if he moved out of the palace now, this palace was still there. It was convenient for him to live in it now, and the imperial physician could come to treat him every day. It was also much more convenient for the Empress Dowager to see him every day. My good grandson, do you miss me? A joyful voice came from the door. The curtain was lifted, and the Empress Dowager came in with a personal nanny. All the others stayed outside the door. Xiao Xuanzi hurriedly kowtowed to the Empress Dowager respectfully, and then gently and quietly retreated to the side, looking docile. As early as when his master mentioned the Empress Dowager, Xiao Xuanzi had noticed the Empress Dowager's arrival. Even he had noticed it. How could his master not know it early? He knew it. Imperial Grandmother. Chu Luchen smiled gently with admiration in his eyes, which almost melted the Empress Dowager's heart. She came over and sat on the couch. When she looked at the medicine bowl in front of him, her face slightly darkened. Why haven't you drunk the medicine yet? Imperial Grandmother, I'm not in a hurry. Chu Luchen said with a smile. His pale face made him look more innocent and sick. The Empress Dowager reached out to touch the bowl. The medicine had been put for a while, and it was a little cold. She said with an angry expression, "You are not in a hurry, but I am. Drink it quickly." "Yes, Imperial Grandmother, I'll drink it." Chu Luchen obediently picked up the medicine bowl at hand and drank it in a few mouthfuls. The Empress Dowager picked up the jar of candied plums placed aside, and was about to take a candied plum for him. "Imperial Grandmother, I'm not a girl. I don't want to eat such sweet and greasy things." Chu Luchen frowned and shook his head hurriedly. He put down the bowl in his hand, picked up the snow-white handkerchief placed aside, gently wiped the brown medicine stain on the corner of his mouth, and then put it down gracefully. "Imperial Grandmother, I heard that Madame of Duke Xing is going to adopt a daughter." "Chen, how do you know this?" The Empress Dowager asked in surprise, and did not force Chu Luchen to eat the candied plums. "Imperial Grandmother, I just heard it." Chu Luchen said vaguely. The Empress Dowager reached out to touch his forehead, and scolded with a smile, "Did you go to inquire about the girl's affairs again? How old is she?" "Imperial Grandmother, I'm sick and so bored. I've saved her, but why didn't she come to thank me?" Chu Luchen said sullenly. "This is against the rules, and did you really save her? It's you who got her into trouble." The Empress Dowager said with a smile. Both the Empress Dowager and the Emperor had investigated this matter. No matter how they looked at it, they felt that this matter was aimed at Chu Luchen. Qin Wanru was a girl who had just arrived in the capital city. What kind of hatred could she have that made someone use such a thorough plan to plot against her? This kind of means was not an ordinary boudoir means. It was obvious that she had a powerful background. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor both thought that Qin Wanru was a fish in the pond who got into trouble. In this way, Chu Luchen really hurt her. If he didn't live in the Qin's mansion when he was in Jiangzhou, maybe the girl of the Qin's mansion would not have suffered. From this point of view, the Empress Dowager still had a good impression of Qin Wanru. But her status was a little low. Qin Huayong just arrived in the capital city and did not have any special achievements. It was not easy for him to be promoted. "Imperial Grandmother, I did save someone. Shouldn't the person who was saved come to visit me? Isn't it a little ungrateful?" Chu Luchen said discontentedly. Okay. Imperial Grandmother will summon her in 2 days and let her enter the palace to thank you," the Empress Dowager said helplessly. "Thank you, Imperial Grandmother," Chu Luchen said with a smile. His gentle eyebrows and eyes were stained with a smile, which made people feel that he was more like a jade. "Now have a good rest and don't think too much. That girl is still so young. It's useless to think about it," the Empress Dowager said with a smile and reached out to pat his head. "Imperial Grandmother, I didn't think about this. I just think that this little girl is very interesting. I heard that she is not the daughter of Ningyuan Army General's wife." Chu Luchen said calmly. "Daughter of a concubine?" The Empress Dowager's face was a little ugly. She originally thought that her status was low. If she was just a daughter of a concubine, even if she was a concubine, she would be given a higher position. At most, she would be a concubine. Not a daughter of a concubine. "I heard that she is not the daughter of Ningyuan Army General. I don't know whether it is true or not. When I was in Jiangzhou, I heard that she is the child of Ningyuan Army General's colleague. During that disaster, her father died on the battlefield." Chu Liuchen's handsome eyes blinked and said, "The orphan of a soldier?" The Empress Dowager was a little moved. "It seems so, but I'm not very clear. When I was in Jiangzhou, I inquired about it a little. Because it has nothing to do with me, I didn't take it seriously. Chu Luchen said casually. You. How can you be so ungrateful? If she is really the orphan of a soldier, she is better than the daughter of a concubine in Ningyuan army general's mansion. The Empress Dowager patted Chu Luchen and said helplessly. This child was just careless. But looking at his body, she suddenly felt sad. All the child's energy was in fighting against the disease. How could he have the energy to care about other things? Although he was now good to the second miss of Qin's mansion, it was probably for the sake of her being a playmate. He didn't really have any personal feelings for her. After all, she looked so young. Thinking in this way, the heart that had some obstacles was somewhat cleared up. She had always thought that although the second miss of Qin's mansion looked young, she was not bad at scheming. She should be a schemer since she could make her sick grandson keep thinking about her. Chapter 319. Now Chu Liuchen's words cleared up the knot in Empress Dowager's heart. It was not that Qin Wanru, who looked young, was scheming, but she was just like a playmate when she got along with her grandson. A playmate could be valued, but she did not need to be valued to the extent that she had to be there. In the palace, even if it was a simple thing, Empress Dowager would think about whether someone was plotting something behind it. How about letting her dress up as a boy and enter the palace to accompany you? Empress Dowager tentatively said. That's also good. There is only Xiao Xuanzi. It's so boring. Chu Luchen said indifferently. Therefore, in her grandson's heart, this girl only had the same position as Xiao Xuanzi, which was the position of a little eunuch. Thinking of this, Empress Dowager became more and more happy. Empress Dowager did not like Qin Wanru, but if Chu Luchen insisted on Qin Wanru, she would not object. This child did not want many things, and Empress Dowager would not say anything to make him happy. But she wanted to choose Chu Liuchen's legal wife to support him. If he really disappointed her or the family behind her, it would not be a good thing. If a concubine threatened the status of the legal wife, the family would be in chaos. Of course, these also had a premise. Chu Luchen must like and agree with her. Her grandson did not ask much. If he strongly wanted something, as long as she could have it, Empress Dowager would be willing to give him anything. At present, Chu Liuchen's attitude was the best. Maybe in a few years, the relationship between them would not be so good. After all, the girl was still young. She was not very sensible now, but it did not mean that she would not be sensible in the future. Maybe she would like her other grandchildren. If she asked for it herself, it would not hurt the relationship between herself and her grandson, nor would it hinder the relationship between her grandson and legal wife in the future. That would be the best. As for whether Qin Wanru would like other grandchildren, Empress Dowager thought it was not a big deal. The reason why she could play well with her grandson now was that she had not been enlightened. When she was enlightened, she would definitely dislike her grandson's illness and weakness. Moreover, even if she did not have this idea, her own parents would give her such an idea. If she let her other grandchildren treat her better, things would be much simpler. As for now, of course, she wouldn't go against her grandson's wishes. He was just a childhood playmate, so it wasn't a big deal. I will summon her to the palace to see you in 2 days. The Empress Dowager was very easy to talk to now. She also made her attitude clear. She was no longer making excuses like a few days ago. Thank you, grandmother. Chu Luchen said with a lazy smile at the corner of his mouth, with the tiredness of a young man. Imperial grandmother, I heard that Madame of Duke Xing is going to recognize her adopted daughter today. I also want to join in the fun. Where can you go with such a body? The Empress Dowager's face darkened. What happened to my body? I'm very well now, and the imperial physician also asked me to walk more, so that I won't be bored here all the time. Chu Luchen said, feeling wronged. Well, stop it. I won't allow it. Empress Dowager directly stopped Chu Luchen from saying anything. Imperial grandmother. Chu Luchen looked at the Empress Dowager with his handsome eyes slightly raised. His eyes became clearer and clearer, which made people's hearts soften. The Empress Dowager felt that she couldn't stay any longer. If she stayed any longer, her heart would definitely soften. She simply stood up, looked out of the window and said, "It's getting late, and I have to go. Your uncle has something to talk to me later. I will come to see you tomorrow. Imperial Grandmother, remember to come tomorrow." Chu Luchen looked helpless. "Okay, you have a rest first. I will remember to summon that girl in." Seeing that Chu Luchen was relieved, the Empress Dowager's face became better again and she said with a smile, "Thank you, Grandmother." "Goodbye, Grandmother." Chu Luchen also showed a smile on his face. The Empress Dowager nodded with satisfaction, turned around and walked out with the nanny. Xiao Xuanzi had been waiting by the door curtain and raised the curtain high. After the Empress Dowager left, Xiao Xuanzi put down the curtain again. "Master, Xiao Xuanzi doesn't understand what you mean." Xiao Xuanzi really didn't understand. Did his master attach importance to second Miss Qin or not? Was she really just a playmate? Chu Luchen squinted at him and raised the corners of his mouth with an evil smile. Compared with his performance in front of the Empress Dowager just now, he was almost a different person. Fortunately, Xiao Xuanzi knew that his master was the most changeable. "Let's go to Duke Xing's mansion to have a look." "What, Master, what are you doing?" "The Empress Dowager just said that you are not allowed to go out. If you really go out, I will die." Xiao Xuanzi was so scared that he cried out with a sad face. "I can't go." Chu Luchen raised his handsome eyebrows. "I can't go. I really can't go. I will die. I can't serve you in the future." Xiao Xuanzi was scared out of his wits. If his master really insisted on going his own way, he could only be punished in the end. "Then you go." Chu Luchen smiled. "I go." Xiao Xuanzi was stunned for a moment and didn't understand. "You go to find Qin Wanru. I will write a letter to her. She will know what to do." Chu Luchen sat up straight from the bed and stopped joking with Xiao Xuanzi. "Master, do you mean to let me sneak into Duke Xing's mansion?" "But the Empress Dowager will know." Xiao Xuanzi said. "So what? I won't go out anyway." Imperial Grandmother will turn a blind eye. Chu Luchen said meaningfully with his eyes slightly fixed. Of course, he knew clearly what Imperial Grandmother was afraid of. Now this taboo was gone, some things were not considered to be out of line. "I will give her a person who needs it most now." When Qin Wanru received the letter, she almost couldn't believe it and looked at Xiao Xuanzi who was dressed as a servant in front of her. Did she see it wrong? Did she see it wrong? This was clearly the chief eunuch of Prince Chen's mansion, Xiao Xuanzi. So when Xiao Xuanzi presented the letter, Qin Wanru subconsciously looked around nervously. "Second miss, our master didn't come." Xiao Xuanzi whispered. Qin Wanru's heart fell heavily. She pinched the corner of the letter and carefully put the letter in her sleeve. Here was Duke Xing's mansion, there were many people coming and going. If she opened the letter here and was seen by others, it would be an inexplicable argument again. "Is it urgent?" Qin Wanru asked in a low voice. "It's not urgent, but it is very important to second miss." Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile. "Is it your master's idea?" Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes and asked. "It is our master's idea. Our master said that the Empress Dowager will summon second miss to the palace in 2 days." Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile. "What's the matter?" Qin Wanru's heart jumped and her face changed slightly. "Nothing, it is our master's idea." Xiao Xuanzi smiled and said meaningfully, "Our master doesn't want to stay in the palace and wants to go back to the mansion." There was a special meaning in his words, but Qin Wanru understood it. She bent her watery eyes slightly, nodded and said, "Okay, I got it." "Hey, where did this servant come from? How could he be so unruly as to come to the backyard?" Could it be that he was sent by another young master? A sharp voice came from behind the artificial mountain. Qin Wanru and Xiao Xuanzi looked back together and saw Di Fenglan, who looked arrogant, walking slowly with a few misses from aristocratic families. They all looked at Qin Wanru sarcastically. Servants were rarely used in the inner court, except for sending messages. Although Xiao Xuanzi looked young and had red lips and white teeth, he was a servant after all. Miss D, I have no grudge against you in the past and no hatred today, right? Qin Wanru said calmly. What do you mean? Di Fenglan sneered. Nothing. I just want to ask why Miss D is so timely. As soon as I talk to this servant, you come out. Qin Wanru looked at Di Fenglan and said with a smile. What nonsense are you talking about? Di Fenglan said angrily. She didn't expect that Qin Wanru would make a false accusation in front of so many misses. Whether I am talking nonsense or not, Miss D knows it best. Our Qin's mansion and your Duke Yang's mansion are going to be married. Why does Miss D always dislike me? When I was in trouble before, Miss D seemed to say something in the crowd. Did you say something good about me at that time? Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered twice, and her watery eyes narrowed. Qin Wanru, it's your own fault. Di Fenglan's face turned red. She said a lot of bad things about Qin Wanru at that time, and these misses around her all heard it. Did I? Didn't the previous thing prove that Child Wang framed me, and even my official title will be revoked? Is it possible that Miss D knows this Child Wang, so you want to speak for him? Qin Wanru looked puzzled, and her bright watery eyes became deeper and deeper. If Miss D wants to exonerate Child Wang, you can go to the school government. What's the use of saying it to me? What she meant was that there was something between Di Fenglan and Wang Xingxue, so she kept targeting Qin Wanru. The young madams around Di Fenglan all stepped back and looked at her with some suspicion. If Di Fenglan was really such a person, it would inevitably make others doubt their reputation if they were to be on good terms with her. Seeing the synchronized movements of those misses, Di Fenglan was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She reached out and pointed at Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, don't point fingers at a deer as a horse, and don't pester endlessly. I just want to ask you what's wrong with this servant. Why did he talk to you secretly? If he didn't know you, why didn't he talk to others but you? How do you know that he wouldn't talk to others, Miss D? Qin Wanru said lightly. So many of us have seen it. Can it be fake? Di Fenglan reached out and drew all the misses into it. Although she was furious, she did not lose her mind. If she confronted Qin Wanru alone, she would be dragged back to Wang Xingxue's matter, and it would be hard for her to explain it. She did not believe that Qin Wanru could deny the fact that so many people had seen it. But seeing that Qin Wanru deliberately diverted the matter, she knew that there must be something behind it. Qin Wanru had escaped from Wang Xingxue's matter in the end. She wanted to see how she would explain it this time. Di Fenglan could not help showing a little pride in her eyes, but the next moment, this pride froze on her face. Chapter 320. How dare you? We are talking here. There is no place for a servant like you to talk. Di Fenglan's words were almost squeezed out from her throat. She looked at Xiao Xuanzi and said harshly. Miss D, I really have something to talk to you. I was just asking this miss where you are. Xiao Xuanzi followed Chu Youchen's henchman. He had seen all kinds of people, not to mention an ordinary miss from an aristocratic family. He couldn't stop her and continued to report. There was even a little anxiety in his behavior. Just now, Miss D insisted that this manservant came to me with bad intentions, but what about now? He is looking for you. Does it mean that Miss D has something to do with the outer court? Qin Wanru said lightly. How dare you? Sensing that several misses around her took a step back, Di Fenglan's face turned livid with anger. Miss D, it's true. It's about Child D. When I was in the outer yard just now, Child D was drunk. His servant was still taking care of him. He especially asked me to come in to find you and ask if you could go over and take care of child D. Xiao Xuanzi said seriously. My big brother was drunk? Di Fenglan was stunned for a moment. The anger on her face faded like the tide, and she said hurriedly. Yes, he was so drunk that he couldn't recognize anyone. Xiao Xuanzi shook his head and said. Where is he? Di Fenglan asked. Not far ahead. You can see him when you go out of Chuehua Gate and turn right. If Miss D doesn't know the way, you can ask the old maid of Chuehua Gate or let her lead the way. If the male guests in the mansion want to rest, they can rest there. Xiao Xuanzi said calmly. His words were very close to the point without any hesitation. Di Fenglan believed him and didn't care about arguing with Chen Wanru anymore. She immediately nodded and said, Okay, you lead the way. Okay, Miss D, follow me. Xiao Xuanzi said with a smile and turned to go out. He just came along Chuehua Gate and met Qin Wanru not far away, so he was very familiar with this road. Miss D, are you going to go with him without asking clearly? Seeing that Di Fenglan was about to leave, Qin Wanru suddenly said. I am going to take care of my brother. It is none of your business. Di Fenglan snorted coldly. Miss D, it's not good for you to follow a manservant, right? Those who don't know might think that Miss D is in a hurry to meet someone. Qin Wanru sneered. What Qin Wanru said was exactly what Di Fenglan meant before. Di Fenglan's mocking face immediately turned blue and white, but she did not get angry immediately. She just glared at Qin Wanru and said, Qin Wanru, I'm going to take care of my brother. Who knows? Qin Wanru chuckled and turned to leave, leaving Di Fenglan and several young madams standing there thoughtfully. As soon as Qin Wanru left, several young madams also took their leave. Although they had a good personal relationship with Di Fenglan was now taking care of her drunk brother. It was inappropriate for them to follow her. After saying goodbye to them one by one, Di Fenglan hurriedly followed Xiao Xuanzi to go out. She was really anxious. Her eldest brother's temper was not good, especially when he drank too much. Once, because of drinking too much, he robbed a prostitute on the street. If this happened in Duke Xing's mansion in front of so many childs from aristocratic families, it would be really shameful. Moreover, others would doubt her character because of her eldest brother's character. Miss, why did Miss D believe it so quickly? After Di Fenglan and several young madams left one after another, Qin Wanru and Yujie came out from behind a big tree. They didn't go far just now. I heard that child D has a bad temper when drunk. Qin Wanru said, with a trace of bloodthirsty coldness flashing in her eyes. The so-called bad temper when drunk almost hurt her in the last life. Miss D is afraid that child D will make trouble. Yujie understood. She stood behind Qin Wanru and didn't see the dark and bloodthirsty coldness in Qin Wanru's eyes. Let's go to find big sister. Qin Wanru stood still for a while, calmed down and turned around. Why do you want to find first miss? Yujie followed and turned around. If child D is drunk, we have to tell big sister. Qin Wanru looked thoughtfully in the direction of the inner courtyard. Duke Xing's mansion was very big. Looking at it, one could only see carved beams and painted rafters, exquisite pavilions, and rockery pavilions everywhere. It deserved to be one of the big aristocratic families in the capital city. However, she didn't see Qin Yuru all the way here. She also followed Qin Yuru's footsteps and left, but she didn't find any trace of Qin Yuru. She even asked several servant girls on the way, and they all said they didn't see Qin Yuru. From the previous position to the present position of Chuehua Gate, she didn't see Qin Yuru all the way. Did it mean that Qin Yuru was taken away by someone after leaving her? Qin Yuru's actions today didn't seem to be without any intention. Qin Wanru also had an idea of what her intention was. She wanted to see what kind of person the old madam of Duke Xing's mansion was. Are you the first miss of Qin's mansion? The temperature in the room was very high, which was completely different from the cold winter wind outside. However, because of the overheating, Chin Yuru, who wore a thick winter coat, felt her body was sticky and uncomfortable. However, she didn't dare to show it. The old madam, who looked bad sitting in the room, was the old madam of Duke Xing's mansion. Yes, my father is the Ningyuan army general. Chin Yuru tried hard to show a calm and indifferent temperament. Even though there were huge waves in her heart at this time, and wealth and glory seemed to be at her fingertips, it was really not easy for her to show this kind of indifference now. Why did your mother beat you? There was a kind of very strong incense burning in the room of old madam. The curling fragrance almost blurred old madam's face for a moment, but the next moment, it appeared clearly in front of Chin Yuru. Mother, maybe. I made her angry. Chin Wanru said carefully according to Madame D's instructions. Your mother used to beat you like this? Old madam asked. She used to beat me, but not as hard as this time. I may not do it well and always make her angry. I am worse than my second sister. Chin Yuru lowered her head and cried. When she wiped her tears with a handkerchief, her long sleeves fell a little, and a few bruises with blood could be seen. It was obvious that she beat her hard. Old madam showed a bit of pity on her face and said confusedly, I heard that your second sister is not your mother's biological daughter, but you are your mother's biological daughter. Does she treat you better than second miss who is not her biological daughter? I don't know. Chin Yuru lowered her head sadly and said with red eyes. Our first miss is also not our madam's biological daughter. Mei Shui, who followed behind her, said boldly. Mei Shui, don't talk nonsense. Chin Yuru scolded in a low voice. Plop. Mei Shui knelt down and said, First miss, I am not wrong. When madam beat you, she did not act like a biological mother. I also secretly heard Nanny Zhou and madam privately talking about, Mei Shui, you are so presumptuous. Chin Yuru scolded angrily, and her face was red with anger. It seemed that she was very unwilling to let Mei Shui say such a thing. Tell me, what is going on? Old madam of Duke Xing's mansion seemed to be interested. She coughed in a low voice and looked at Mei Shui and said. Old madam, I. Mei Shui looked flustered and stole a glance at Chin Yuru, but she did not dare to say a word. First Miss Chin, it may be related to Duke Xing's mansion. Can you let your servant girl finish her words? Old madam looked at Chin Yuru with a gentle and kind smile. Yes. Chin Yuru held her handkerchief and lowered her head. How could she not give face to old madam of Duke Xing's mansion? Moreover, old madam of Duke Xing's mansion also said that it was related to Duke Xing's mansion. Tell me, what is going on? Old madam asked Mei Shui kindly. First miss was beaten again once, and I helped first miss to leave. After that, first miss was afraid that madam would get angry and hurt her body, so she specially asked me to go and have a look secretly. I heard madam and Nanny Zhou say that first miss is not madam's biological daughter. It seems that first miss was picked up. Since Chin Yuru had agreed, Mei Shui spoke fluently. She bowed to old madam and reported to her master. Picked up. When did it happen? Old madam's face suddenly became happy. This servant doesn't know. I only said that during the rebellion a few years ago, madam saw that first miss was pretty, so she took her in. At that time of war, madam didn't live with the general. Later, she made an excuse that first miss was born early and raised in her hometown. Madam didn't have any children. Seeing that madam liked her, the general agreed. Mei Shui said. How old is your first miss today? Old madam's voice also trembled, and she almost couldn't help standing up. Our first miss is 13 years old today. Mei Shui answered. When you came to our mansion last time, you wore a dress with orchid embroidery pattern. Why did you wear this one? Old madam calmed down, turned to Chin Yuru, and said slowly. She held the chair so tightly that the blue veins on her hands stood out. Which one? Chin Yuru looked confused. She looked back at Mei Shui, as if she didn't remember. There were more clothes for misses from aristocratic families, and most of them were prepared by personal servant girls. It was normal that she didn't remember it at the moment. The one you wore to Duke Xing's mansion last time. At that time, Qi Rongji and your second sister wore similar clothes. Old Madam said, and there was a little more anxiety between her eyebrows. Mei Shui rolled her eyes, and suddenly raised her head to look at Qin Yuru and said, "First Miss, I remember that you were the first to embroider those orchid patterns. First Miss Qi and second Miss embroidered them after seeing you. The clothes that my second sister and Miss Qi embroidered with the same pattern?" Qin Yuru suddenly understood. "Yes, that's the set. Where did you get the orchid pattern?" Old Madam asked anxiously. Chapter 321. Can you show it to me? Old Madam asked. Yes, Old Madam. Qin Yuru took out a seal from her sleeve and presented it respectfully. An old maid came over to take the seal and handed it to Old Madam on the couch. When Old Madam saw the pattern on it, she burst into tears and her face was covered with tears. "Old Madam, don't be sad. Now we have news, right? It's better than no news at all." The old maid who presented it comforted her in a low voice. How could he be so cruel? He left just like that. Sure enough, he forgot his mother after having a wife. He left just like that. For so many years, there was no news from him. He. Old Madam cried so hard that her voice was choked with sobs, and tears fell down one by one. "Old Madam, don't be sad. What the heir did was an expedient measure. He didn't really want to fight against you. But who knew that such a thing would happen? If the heir knew this, he wouldn't do that." The old maid comforted Old Madam in a low voice. In the room, there were several servant girls standing still with their heads bowed, like clay sculptures. "But why can't he understand who I did all this for? After being married for so long, he didn't have a child. Could it be that she was right?" Old Madam cried and said angrily. "Old Madam, you're right. Your decision at that time was naturally correct. If the heir knew it, he would definitely agree. But there was an accident, right? If the heir was still here, he would definitely realize that he was wrong. Old Madam really did it for him." The old maid continued to persuade her in a low voice. These words seemed to comfort Old Madam. Old Madam wiped her tears and raised her head with red eyes. She turned to Qin Yuru with gentle eyes and waved to her. "Child, come here and let me have a look." "Yes." Qin Yuru said softly. She took a few steps forward and walked to Old Madam. Old Madam's soft eyes fell on Qin Yuru's face. She looked Qin Yuru up and down with kind eyes. "Old Madam, look, she really looks like the heir." The old maid on the side joked, "Look, her eyes are almost the same as the heir's." Old Madam nodded and then said indifferently, "I can't see anything else, but these eyes do look like hers. She should follow the princess in other aspects." The old maid flattered with a smile, but her words were rudely interrupted by Old Madam, "Don't tell me about her." Yes, I misspoke," the old maid said carefully. She did make a slip of the tongue just now. Madame Dowager had never liked the wife of the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion. Her words made Madame Dowager unhappy. "Child, have you ever thought of coming to Duke Xing's mansion?" Old Madam looked at Qin Yuru kindly and said. "Old Madam, we have to think about it in the long run." The old maid reminded Old Madam on the side. Old Madam nodded and looked at Qin Yuru. She reached out and touched her head. "If your mother beats you again in the future, just come to me. I will avenge you." Old Madam's manner of taking care of everything was very imposing. Qin Yuru's eyes turned red. She nodded hard and said, "Thank you, Old Madam." "Don't say thank you. I am." Old Madam paused and thought for a while. In the end, she didn't say anything more. She just sighed heavily and said, "Your mother is capricious." Qin Yuru didn't understand what she said at the moment. She didn't know whether she was talking about Madame D or someone else. But old Madame looked straight into the void without any focus. Qin Yuru didn't think she was talking about Madame D. But old Madame's look seemed to penetrate. Obviously, there was nothing there, but old Madame seemed to see someone there. She became angry and said, "Look at what you have done. You just sent a few servant girls here, and you have made such a scene. How can you behave like this in the royal family?" Was old Madame talking to herself? Moreover, she seemed to see something. Qin Yuru couldn't help but feel terrified. She took a step back subconsciously and looked panicked. "Old Madame, old Madame." After the old maid glared at Qin Yuru, she comforted old Madame softly. Seeing that it was useless to call her, she reached out and pulled her sleeves. Old Madame's eyes moved a little bit. It seemed that she was awakened by the old maid. She turned to look at Qin Yuru with gentle eyes and said, "Do you want to be the granddaughter of Duke Xing's mansion?" This question was as abrupt as the previous words. Qin Yuru didn't know how to answer it. Seeing Qin Yuru stunned there, old Madame seemed to know that Qin Yuru couldn't accept her words at once. She smiled and said, "Go back and ask your mother if she is willing to let you be the granddaughter of Duke Xing's mansion. I will ask Wan Yan to accept you as her adopted daughter." What do you think? The so-called Wan Yan was the name of Madame of Duke Xing. "Thank you, old Madame." Qin Yuru bit her lips and looked excited and surprised. "This is fate. When I saw you, I felt it was fate. You can leave now." Old Madame sighed and thought that Madame of Qin's mansion would not refuse this kind of thing. Things changed so fast that old Madame still couldn't calm down. She had something in her mind and waved her hand to let Qin Yuru leave temporarily. "Yes, old Madame." Qin Yuru felt relieved. She couldn't hide the joy on her face. She hurriedly lowered her head and said respectfully to hide the joy in her eyes. As her mother said, as long as old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion saw this seal, she would ask her to go to Duke Xing's mansion. This was originally planned by Qin Yuru and Madame D. She was a little uneasy before and didn't expect things to go so smoothly. From now on, she was the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion, which was also noble among the misses of aristocratic families. Thinking of this, Qin Yuru couldn't help but want to laugh. Qi Rongji was nothing. Madame of Duke Xing only accepted her because she was dispensable. Only she could really get the love of old Madame of Duke Xing. As for Qin Wanru, she would be in the palm of her hand in the future. If she wanted her to die, she would definitely not live. Of course, there was also Shui Rulan. Her mother said that as long as she could successfully enter Duke Xing's mansion, her father would definitely release her mother. Shui Rulan wanted to fight against her mother, but what could she do? A woman with no background dared to think about the position of the legal Madame of Qin's mansion. Even if there was an evil baby in her belly, so what? Her mother would not let her give birth. After retreating to the outside of the courtyard, Qin Yuru couldn't hide the joy on her face anymore. She chuckled in a low voice and covered her face with a handkerchief. She hurriedly turned around, for fear of being seen by others. "Old Madam, she is really the daughter of heir of Duke Xing's mansion." After Qin Yuru left, the room became quiet. After a long while, the old maid said cautiously, "She is the biological daughter of the eldest son. After so many years, we finally found her. But this child has a poor life. She has always regarded someone else as her biological mother. Judging from her appearance just now, she is also a person who protects her adoptive mother. Although her adoptive mother treated her like this, she didn't say anything bad about her adoptive mother and even deceived herself." Old Madame sighed and said, "First Miss Qin's temper and temperament are the same as old Madame's in those years. From this, we can also see that First Miss Qin is really the daughter of heir of Duke Xing's mansion." The old maid hurriedly joked. Old Madame nodded repeatedly with a slight smile on her face, but then the smile disappeared. She said, "Can't we recognize her openly?" Madam, that's what you mean. You know that Rui, and great elder princess, has always disliked our mansion. If we really take him back with great fanfare, I'm afraid that there will be some trouble. Moreover, even if we really take him back, Rui, and great elder princess will take him away. Just like Master Hao, our mansion has been pampered for so many years. Great elder princess has always told the Empress Dowager what she wants, and Master Hao was taken away. These words made old madam a little angry. She patted the table beside her hand hard and said, "It's really going too far. At first, I didn't like the people in Rui, and great elder princess's mansion. At first glance, I knew that they were ill-fated. Their father died at a young age. Look at what happened now, it really happened." At that time, old madam was extremely opposed to the marriage. However, Xiao Jiang, who was still the heir of Duke at that time, took a fancy to Infanta Qinghua and specially begged the emperor to grant the marriage, so old madam had no choice. That's right. Old madam's words are naturally right. The old maid replied cautiously. If these words were spread out, as an old maid, she might even lose her life. But at this time, she said in front of old madam, which was quite sincere. Old madam sighed heavily and was speechless for a while. After a long while, she said, "Then let's do as Wan Yan said. Let her go back to the mansion first. It's not a big deal whether she can recognize her ancestors or not. After all, she is just a daughter. Although she is the eldest son's flesh and blood, with Hao, we don't need to care so much. It's just that this child is suffering. She is the legitimate miss of Duke Xing's mansion, but she still has to bear the title of an adopted daughter." Speaking of this, old madam's eyes turned red again. She picked up her handkerchief and wiped her tears again. "Old madam, don't be sad. Your health can't stand it. Moreover, even if the first Miss Qin can't clearly recognize her ancestors, old madam can love her more. We should let people know that although the first Miss Qin is madam's adopted daughter, she has won old madam's favor, and her social status will naturally rise." The old maid comforted her in a low voice. Old madam nodded and said, "Now we can only think in this way. Let's put aside the new girl surnamed Qi. Yuru is my biological granddaughter. Tell Wan Yan to pay more attention to her. Don't put her and the girl surnamed Qi together." "Yes, I will explain to madam later and tell madam that you have recognized the identity of the first Miss Qin." The old maid nodded and said. After saying this, she seemed to want to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that she had something to say but was very embarrassed. Old madam immediately sensed her embarrassment. She wiped her tears with her handkerchief and said, "Say it. What else do you want?" "It's the screen wall of the heir of Duke." Chapter 322. Didn't I agree to paint the screen wall? Old madam knew what the old maid was talking about and said unhappily. The courtyard was originally for the heir of Duke Xing's mansion to live in, and it had been empty for so many years. Now, in order to apply for the title of Duke Xing's mansion for his eldest grandson, it was imperative to let him live in this courtyard. Then the words on the screen wall had to be cleaned. The current heir moved into the courtyard, but the words on the screen wall at the entrance belonged to the previous heir. Furthermore, the two of them were not even father and son. This made people feel extremely uncomfortable, and it also felt like bad luck. Old madam liked this promising eldest grandson very much. Of course, she didn't want her eldest grandson to be criticized by others. Moreover, the old lady always cared more about this kind of bad luck. One of the important reasons why she didn't like Infanta Qinghua at that time was that Infanta Qinghua's father died early. Old madam thought she was an unlucky person and didn't want her to marry into Duke Xing's mansion. Even if she was supported by Ruian great elder princess. Master Hao didn't allow us to apply it, and he made a scene in the yard just now. Madam doesn't know what to do. The old maid said helplessly. What? Hao is back. Where is he? Why don't you ask him to come and see me? Old madam didn't expect Ruan to come and see me. Hearing that great elder princess would let Xiao Yuanhao come back, she immediately said with great surprise and did not care about what Xiao Yuanhao had done. In the past, Xiao Yuanhao had made a lot of trouble in Duke Xing's mansion. Master Hao left again. The old maid said eagerly. What? He actually left? What's going on? Why didn't you report to me when Hao came back? Madame Dowager was furious. It's not that she didn't come to report it. Master Hao had been playing outside and didn't enter the inner court. There were many guests today, so Madame didn't notice it. When she noticed it, Master Hao had made a scene in the inner court. Then he smashed the ink bucket angrily and went back to Rue and Great Elder Princess Mansion. The old maid knew it was not good. Knowing that old madam was angry, she immediately explained. Why didn't you leave him behind? Old madam said angrily and hurriedly with a gloomy face. Xiao Yuanhao had grown up by her side since he was a child, and he had no parents. Old madam cared about him very much. If it were not for Rue and Great Elder Princess who was powerful and said that Xiao Yuanhao was her only relative, old madam would not let him go no matter what. Master Hao was very angry at that time, and no one dared to stop him. He also said that no one was allowed to paint the screen wall. Otherwise, he would not be polite, and he would bring Rue and Great Elder Princess here to fight. He said that he would send someone to tear down the wall in a few days and then move it to Great Elder Princess's mansion. The old maid said with a wry smile. The wrinkles on her face were deep. What a childish child. Old madam sighed. She was appeased by Xiao Yuanhao's childish words. That wall. How could it be moved out of Duke Xing's mansion? If it was really demolished, it would not be the original wall. Moreover, it was impossible for the characters on it to be preserved. At this time, old madam only thought that Xiao Yuanhao was not sensible enough to say such words. But since he said it, old madam hesitated in her heart. She frowned tightly and leaned back. How about we don't paint the wall? This is also Hao's only wish. Old madam, what should first young master do? The position of heir of Duke Xing has not been decided for a long time. The news from the imperial palace is that they think our first young master is not legitimate. That is the courtyard where heir of Duke Xing lives. How can we let that courtyard be empty forever? The old maid said with a flattering smile. This sentence hit the most important thing in old madam's heart. How could the position of heir of Duke Xing's mansion be delayed again and again because of her wish? She loved her youngest grandson, but she liked her eldest grandson more. The eldest grandson, who had always been decent and polite, was the pride of Duke Xing's mansion. Old madam liked him as much as her eldest granddaughter. In this way, the position of the youngest grandson had to be delayed. However, if Xiao Yuanhao did not come back in the future, he would be regarded as the heir of Rue and Great Elder Princess. Her son would marry a wife instead of marrying into Rue and Great Elder Princess's family. Thinking of this, old madam was angry and annoyed. She only thought that Rue and Great Elder Princess had gone too far. Hao's surname was Xiao, and he was indeed the blood of Duke Xing's mansion. However, because Rue and Great Elder Princess had no other relatives, she forced her to separate from Hao. She didn't know what Rue and Great Elder Princess had said to Hao, so that Hao did not come to see her as soon as he came to Duke Xing's mansion, which made her angry. Thinking of this, she increasingly felt that it was not a good thing to let Xiao Yuanhao stay with Rue and Great Elder Princess. However, she had no way to get Hao back. Although the Empress did not say it explicitly, her meaning was clear. She said that Rue and Great Elder Princess only had Xiao Yuanhao now, and let Xiao Yuanhao stay with Rue and Great Elder Princess. As for the future, they could talk about it later. Moreover, Hao was willing to do so. These words made old madam speechless, and she could not find anyone to reason with. Since the Empress said so, it should also be the Empress Dowager who had said so. Rue and Great Elder Princess had always had a good relationship with the Empress Dowager. Old Madam felt very aggrieved and increasingly felt that her original decision was right. Infanta Qinghua did not live long, and her son was also unlucky. Now even her 2 children were living extremely hard lives. In Old Madam's heart, she had already regarded Qin Yuru as her own granddaughter. When you politely accept the servant girl of Qi's mansion as your adopted daughter, send a pair of jade bracelets to her for me. Tell her that it is my idea. As for Yuru, send a pair of blood jade bracelets to her as well. Choose the pair of blood jade bracelets in my warehouse. Old Madam ordered. A pair of jade bracelets for Qi Rongji and a pair of jade bracelets for Qin Yuru sounded very fair, but the meaning and gift were very particular. Qi Rongji became the adopted daughter of Madam of Duke Xing, which meant that she was the adopted granddaughter of Old Madam. On such a day, Old Madam should send a gift. However, Qi Rongji, who was accepted as her adopted granddaughter, only got a pair of ordinary jade bracelets, while Qin Yuru, as a guest, could get a pair of blood jade bracelets that were many times more precious. This originally represented the idea of Old Madam, or the idea of Duke Xing's mansion. Tell her that I have a predestined relationship with her and I like her very much. Old Madam closed her eyes slightly and said after thinking for a while. Old Madam thought that this was all she could do for the time being. She believed that Madam of Duke Xing would understand. She was very satisfied with this daughter-in-law, and Qin Yuru was her biological niece. At that time, she originally wanted to marry her eldest son. In order to marry her eldest son, she even brought Qin Yuru to her mansion early and wanted to accompany them as childhood sweethearts. Unexpectedly, her eldest son met Infanta Qinghua. In the end, in order to marry Infanta Qinghua, he disregarded her opinion and went to the imperial palace to ask the emperor to grant a marriage. Every time she thought of this, Old Madam felt full of displeasure and felt that she had wronged her niece. Fortunately, she had an obedient second son, and fortunately, her niece was also obedient to her. After hearing the emperor's decree, after crying in her room for a few days, she promised to listen to all her orders. Old Madam was satisfied with her and felt guilty, but she was reluctant to let her leave, so she could only marry her to her second son. In Old Madam's opinion, her second son could not compare with her eldest son in any way, no matter in appearance or other aspects. Unfortunately, the world made fools of people. In the end, the position of Duke Xing fell to her second son. Thinking of this, Old Madam felt sad, but she also felt that this was undoubtedly a compensation for Madam of Duke Xing. Finally, she could get the position of Madam of Duke Xing. This might be the will of God. Her niece was the legitimate Madam of Duke Xing, and her eldest son, after all, went against her will and God's will, so he suffered such a bad karma. Thinking of this, Old Madam put her hands together and whispered the scripture. Yes, I will go in a while. The old maid nodded and said. Seeing Old Madam close her eyes and chant the Buddha, she winked at several servant girls beside her. Several servant girls acted cleverly. They took out a scripture, a string of Buddha beads, and a small wooden fish and placed them in front of Old Madam. After that, several servant girls left respectfully. Old Madam closed her eyes and put the Buddha beads around her neck. She skillfully picked up the wooden fish at hand and gently knocked it. She silently recited a scripture. When she forgot a few parts, she opened her eyes slightly and looked at the scripture in front of her, and then continued to recite. The old maid also left quietly and whispered to the servant girl standing at the door, Old Madam is chanting scripture inside, and no one is allowed to disturb her. If Old Madam has any orders, immediately go in and serve her. I will go outside to send the bracelets to Madam. Yes, Nanny Yu. Several servant girls bowed respectfully and said. Nanny Yu looked at Old Madam behind her again. Seeing Old Madam sitting on the couch and reciting scripture in a low voice with a solemn face, she knew that Old Madam would not stop for a while, so she turned around and left. Qin Wanru didn't find Qin Yuru along the way, so she turned back. On the way, she saw many misses and madams going in one direction. Hearing that the ceremony of Madam of Duke Xing had begun, Qin Wanru followed the crowd to go there. Along the way, there were more and more people on the road. Everyone had heard the news and was rushing in that direction. Qin Wanru mingled in the crowd and followed the crowd to a flower hall. It was a very large flower hall, but it was not the previous one. From a distance, she saw her grandmother and Shui Rulan sitting there. Although they were not sitting in the main seats, they were a little close to the main seats. The seats were lined up with wings, and behind the seats in front, there were some smaller chairs, which were for the misses who came with the madams of various mansions. Coincidentally, Qin Yuru had also arrived, and she was just behind old madam. Chapter 323. Qin Wanru nodded, walked in with the servant girl, and came behind old Madam Qin. Seeing Qin Wanru appear, old Madam Qin's slightly pale face relaxed. She held Qin Wanru's hand tightly with her slightly cold hand and whispered, "Where is Zhuzhua?" Her palms were cold and sweaty. It could be seen that the old lady was really scared. She just walked around outside. Qin Wanru comforted old Madam Qin with a smile. She knew that what had happened outside must have been heard by old Madam Qin, which frightened her. "Is someone trying to frame you again?" Shui Rulan's face didn't look very good. Seeing Qin Wanru now, she also breathed a sigh of relief. It was inconvenient for her and Madame Dowager to leave. There was only one servant beside them, so they couldn't leave. Hearing madams and misses coming in sporadically talking about Wang Xingxue, both of them were very anxious, but they had no place to find Qin Wanru. Qin Yuru raised her eyebrows, squinted at Qin Wanru, and said nothing, with a little complacency and hatred in her eyes. She remembered clearly the 2 slaps Qin Wanru gave her before. Now she had achieved her wish and didn't care about Qin Wanru for the time being. When their status was established, she would immediately deal with Qin Wanru and Shui Rulan with the power of Duke Xing's mansion. Her mother said that at that time, her father wouldn't dare to say anything for the sake of Duke Xing's mansion. With such confidence, she naturally ignored Qin Wanru. Grandma and mother are fine. The matter has been figured out. Now it is child Wang who is in trouble, and Madam of Duke Xing also knows about it. Qin Wanru said with a smile. That's good, it's good that you're fine. Madame Dowager whispered a few words. Seeing that Qin Wanru's expression didn't seem to be in trouble, she finally felt relieved. There were more and more people in the flower hall, but they were all women. It seemed that almost all the people had come, and all the seats were basically full. A bell rang somewhere, and the sound was distant. Everyone immediately quieted down. Madam of Duke Xing announced with a smile, "Today is a big day for me to adopt my daughter. I specially chose today to hold the banquet so that everyone can meet me." "Congratulations, Madam of Duke Xing," many people said with a smile. Madam of Duke Xing nodded with a smile to show her respect. When the voices around quieted down again, she said with a smile, "My adopted daughter is Qi Rongji, the eldest lineal daughter of the magistrate of Jiangzhou. Because her parents are not in the capital city, this matter has been approved by her eldest brother and Madame Dowager of Qin's mansion, who temporarily lives in Qin's mansion. From now on, Rongji will live in our Qi's mansion and be treated like a miss of our Duke Xing's mansion." It meant that Qi Rongji would be the miss of Duke Xing's mansion in the future. All the madams and young ladies present looked up to her. The banquet held by Madam of Duke Xing was extremely grand. Under normal circumstances, only 3 or 5 relatives and friends were needed to witness the banquet. After all, Qi Rongji was just an adopted daughter. It was impossible for her to be recorded under the name of Madam of Duke Xing, so there was no need to set up a separate family tree. What was more, Qi Rongji's identity was not noble, so there was no need for such a grand banquet. However, since Madam of Duke Xing put on such a grand banquet and invited many madams and young ladies from aristocratic families in the capital city, it seemed that Madam of Duke Xing was very satisfied with this Miss Qi. Of course, some madams and young ladies flattered Madam of Duke Xing with good words. In their opinion, it did not matter who Qi Rongji was. What mattered was that Madam of Duke Xing was happy. Of course, they also secretly praised Qi Rongji's good luck. Madame of Duke Xing liked an insignificant magistrate of Jiangzhou and even held such a grand banquet for her. Some madams had been wondering if there were any unengaged brothers in their mansions. If they were suitable, they could marry Qi Rongji as their daughter-in-law. It was not so easy to marry the daughter of the main family of Duke Xing's mansion. Especially the eldest lineal daughter, who was famous for her beauty, was not only outstanding but also one of the few beauties in the capital city. She was also talented in literature and dignified. Although she was not in the capital city now, many aristocratic families in the capital city still thought about her. But those who could think about her were all big aristocratic families. Some others seriously considered the feasibility of marrying Qi Rongji. 2 rows of neat and tidy servant girls walked in slowly from outside, holding some jewelry and brocade clothes in their hands. Every single one of them seemed to be extremely rare. Dressed in gorgeous clothes, Qi Rongji walked in respectfully behind 2 nannies. In front of everyone, she bowed to Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing stood up and helped her up. Then she took a hairpin from a brocade box presented by a servant girl and inserted it into Qi Rongji's black hair. "Rongji, you are my daughter from now on. If you have any problems, you have to tell me. I can even intervene in your marriage," Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. Qi Rongji blushed and lowered her head. She said in a low voice, "Yes, adoptive mother." "Good, good, good." Hearing Qi Rongji call her adoptive mother, Madame of Duke Xing laughed and pulled her to stand close to her. Obviously, she was pleased by Qi Rongji calling her adoptive mother and seemed to be in a very good mood. "Go to see old Madame Qin and Madame Shui and say goodbye." After laughing, Madame of Duke Xing pulled Qi Rongji's hand and said, "Yes, adoptive mother." Qi Rongji walked slightly and walked past several noble madams with a dignified look. She came to old Madame Qin and bowed deeply. "Since Rongji came to Qin's mansion, Madame Dowager and Madame Shui have taken care of me. Now Rongji has an adoptive mother, so I don't need to bother Madame Dowager and Madame Shui in the future. If Madame Dowager and Madame Shui are free in the future, please visit Rongji more often." "First Miss Qi, you are too polite. Originally, our 2 families are on good terms, so it is not a big deal." Old Madame Qin smiled slightly and said kindly. Qi Rongji stood up straight, turned her eyes from Madame Dowager to Qin Yuru, and then turned to Qin Wanru. She smiled warmly and invited them warmly, "Sister Yuru, Sister Wanru, come to see me when you are free in the future. We have grown up together in the past. Don't let this affection fade because of my departure." She said this as if Qi Rongji had a good relationship with Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru, and also as if she was a person who valued friendship. Qin Wanru didn't say anything. She bowed sideways and glanced at the set of clothes on Qi Rongji. This set of clothes was bought from her butterfly clothing shop. Since she wore the 2 sets of clothes in the palace last time, Madame Dong said that the business of butterfly clothing shop was very good, and the clothes ordered were almost too late to make. Moreover, she hired many embroidery maids to work overtime. "First Miss Qi, you are so polite. But won't you come to see us in the future? When you left, didn't you say that you would come back?" Qin Yuru said with a smile. These words seemed to be a joke because she was familiar with Qi Rongji, but it inexplicably made people feel a little jealous. Moreover, it seemed to imply that Qi Rongji had climbed up a high branch and looked down on Qin's mansion, so she asked everyone in Qin's mansion to visit her in Duke Xing's mansion. Of course, Qin Yuru was unhappy. Just now, she was slapped by Qi Rongji twice. Although she had used ice to quietly reduce the swelling, her face still faintly hurt. When she became the Miss of Duke Xing's mansion, she would not let Qi Rongji go. Qi Rongji was just an adopted daughter. She really thought that she had a great reputation. Qin Yuru didn't believe that she couldn't defeat Qi Rongji. The 2 of them had fought a lot in the past, but with Qi Tianyu's protection, they had never fallen out with each other. Since the relationship between Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu was ruined, the 2 of them had been fighting fiercely. If they were not careful, they would directly fight each other. They didn't care about anything else. But at this moment, they just vaguely said that Qin Yuru also made Qi Rongji unhappy and didn't want to see Qi Rongji's face with an outstanding smile. Qi Rongji's eyes flashed with displeasure. When no one was paying attention, she glared at Qin Yuru fiercely with a bit of coldness in her eyes. She also secretly cursed. When she became the miss of Duke Xing's mansion, she would also teach Qin Yuru a lesson. Qin Yuru dared to betray her elder brother, so she would ruin her reputation. She was not her elder brother, who was always deceived by Qin Yuru's beauty trap. Rongji, come back when you are well. I will introduce you to several madams. While they were fighting openly and secretly, Madame of Duke Xing's voice came at the right time with a smile, as if she didn't hear the undercurrent surging here. However, several madams and misses sitting beside them thoughtfully turned their eyes from Qin Yuru to Qi Rongji, and then from Qi Rongji to Qin Yuru. Then they smiled ambiguously. It seemed that there was a play. After several familiar madams looked at each other, they quietly lowered their heads and slightly curved their lips. The adopted daughter of Duke Xing's mansion was probably not easy to deal with. Several madams who saw the scene just now couldn't help but give up their previous reverie of attaching themselves to Duke Xing's mansion. This first Miss Qi could be stupid or stupid, but she could never be like the one in front of them, who had just become the adopted daughter of Madame of Duke Xing and provoked her former sisters. Her look just now was finally seen by several madams. Yes, adopted mother. Hearing Madame of Duke Xing's call, Qi Rongji restrained the gloominess in her eyes, bowed to old Madame Qin and Shui Rulan politely, and then turned to walk to Madame of Duke Xing. Madame of Duke Xing took her hand and recognized several noble madams around them one by one. These madams also touched each other's hands. For a moment, the guests looked at each other happily. Suddenly, a servant girl ran in from outside and walked to Madame of Duke Xing to report, "Madam, old Madam sends a gift. Invite her in." Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. The surrounding madams couldn't help whispering to each other. This old madam had never been in charge of the affairs of Duke Xing's mansion, but today she reached out to send a gift to the first Miss Qi. It seemed that old madam was also very satisfied with the first Miss Qi. Thinking of this, many madams looked at Qi Rongji with eager eyes again. It was much better to be loved by old Madame of Duke Xing than to be valued by Madame of Duke Xing. Everyone couldn't help looking at the brocade box in the hands of the two servant girls who came in with Nanny Yu. Chapter 324. Madam, this is a gift from old Madam to first Miss Qi. After Nanny Yu stepped forward and bowed to Madame of Duke Xing, she took out a brocade box from a servant girl behind her, opened it, and handed it over. The nearby madams looked over and saw a pair of crystal-clear jade bracelets. They were very beautiful and could tell that they must be exquisite. However, such exquisite bracelets were nothing to old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion, so they were not particularly precious. Everyone's gaze involuntarily turned to the brocade box in the other maid's hand. "Hurry up and thank old Madam," Madame of Duke Xing said with a smile. She asked the servant girl to take the brocade box and pass it to Chuani, who followed Qi Rongji. Chuani took it carefully and stepped aside. "Thank you, old Madam." Qi Rongji bowed gracefully and said happily. She didn't expect that she had such a great fortune. Not only did she win the favor of Madame of Duke Xing, but even old Madam sent a gift to her. In front of so many guests, it was a very honorable thing. There is another gift. Old Madam wants to give it to the first Miss of Qin's mansion. Old Madam said that she feels that she has a special affinity with the first Miss of Qin's mansion. After Nanny Yu bowed for her master, she continued to say to Madame of Duke Xing. These words were very unexpected. The eldest Miss of Qin's mansion. Everyone's eyes involuntarily turned to look behind old Madame Qin. The previous farce made many people know about Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru. Old Madam is going to reward first Miss Qin. Madame of Duke Xing asked with interest, when did old Madam see first Miss Qin? Just now, old Madam met Miss Qin, Old Madam felt that the first Miss Qin looked very familiar, so she asked her to stay and talk with her for a while. After that, they felt that they hit it off very well, so she asked me to give the first Miss Qin a gift when I gave Miss Qi a gift, and asked her to come to Duke Xing's mansion to talk with Old Madam. Nanny Yu said with a smile and told them the cause and effect of the matter. For a moment, many misses from aristocratic families regretted secretly. Why didn't they have such luck to meet Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion? If they met, they would definitely make Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion feel that they were friendly and congenial. Several misses looked at Qin Yuru with jealousy. How could she be so lucky that Old Madam liked her and even let her visit Duke Xing's mansion often in the future? Since it's Old Madam's order, just send it over. First Miss Qin is behind Old Madam Qin. Madam of Duke Xing nodded with a smile and pointed slightly. Nanny Yu turned around with a smile and walked to Old Madam Qin with another servant girl. Qi Rongji's smile was a little stiff. Today was her good day, but now she had become someone else's foil. She stared blankly at Nanny Yu, who led everyone to look at Qin Yuru, and almost twisted the handkerchief in her hand. Qin Yuru was really jealous of her becoming the adopted daughter of Madam of Duke Xing, but she didn't expect that she would act so fast and attract the attention of Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion so soon. Nanny Yu went over and bowed to Old Madam Qin. Old Madam Qin hurriedly stood up and turned aside. Although she was just a servant, she was the trusted servant of Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion. How could ordinary people despise her? Old Madam Qin, this is a gift from our Old Madam to First Miss Qin. Nanny Yu smiled and reached out to open the brocade box in the hand of another servant girl behind her. There was also a pair of jade bracelets in it. At the sight of this pair of jade bracelets, everyone's expression became strange. Even though Qi Rongji's pair of bracelets were also of high quality, compared to this pair of blood jade bracelets, it was immediately a few levels lower. It was obvious that they could not be compared. Some people turned their eyes from Qin Yuru to Qi Rongji, and some quick-witted madams thought that their good sons could actually marry into Qin's mansion. They didn't know whether First Miss Qin was engaged or not. Qin Yuru lifted the corner of her dress and bowed gracefully. Her posture was extremely dignified and steady. Thank you, Old Madam. First Miss Qin is so polite. Old Madam asked you to come and talk with her when you are free. She said she likes talking with you very much. Nanny Yu handed the brocade box in her hand to Mei Shui, and her attitude became more and more polite and intimate. Yes. Qin Yuru became more and more gentle. Nanny Yu glanced at Qin Yuru with satisfaction, and then returned to Madam of Duke Xing. After saying a few words to Madam of Duke Xing, she left with the two servant girls. During this period, she didn't look at the other people around Qin Yuru. Qin Wanru helped Madam Dowager to sit down again. She glanced at the face of this person who was said to be the personal nanny of Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion, and her eyes were cold. She didn't expect it to be her. What a surprise. She was young, and what happened just now had nothing to do with her. Old Madam Qin stood in front of her, and the nanny was focused on Qin Yuru, so she didn't notice her. Her watery eyes glanced at the back of Nanny Yu, and her eyes were thoughtful. Second sister, second sister. Qin Wanru's voice suddenly came to her ears. Qin Wanru slowly withdrew her eyes and looked at Qin Yuru. Second sister, what are you looking at? Are you looking at the nanny of Old Madam? Qin Yuru said with a proud smile. Big sister, do you get along well with Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion? Qin Wanru said calmly. Of course. I didn't expect Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion to be such a kind old madam. She was very gentle when talking to me just now. Qin Yuru showed off. You are indeed predestined with me. Qin Wanru said. Second sister, if you were with me just now, you would definitely be rewarded by Old Madam. Qin Yuru said with a smile. A trace of disgust flashed in Qin Wanru's eyes. Obviously, they hated each other, but Qin Yuru still wanted to show their deep sisterhood in front of others. In fact, she was full of ideas to kill her and had a vicious heart. Big sister, stop talking. Others are paying attention to us. Qin Wanru lowered her voice and said. Her words made Qin Yuru's face turn red. She was ashamed and angry. Hearing her words, several madams who didn't feel anything strange looked at her with a somewhat gloomy look. Ladies of aristocratic families were particular about being educated and polite. Such a happy expression and even a little proud showing off were the most unacceptable. Next, the banquet officially began. Everyone went to another flower hall and the banquet began. Today, most of the people who came to the banquet were womenfolk, but some men accompanied the womenfolk in the mansion. Duke Xing greeted them outside. But men and women were different, so they didn't eat in the same place. Qin Wanru accompanied old Madame Qin and Shui Rulan to a banquet table on the side. Qin Yuru was called by Madame of Duke Xing and sat at the front table with Qi Rongji. Without Qin Yuru by her side, old Madame Qin lowered her voice and asked Qin Wanru, "What happened to your big sister just now? Why did old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion suddenly feel that she got along well with her?" Madame Dowager knew very well what kind of person her eldest granddaughter was. She didn't think that old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion would like Qin Yuru at first sight, and she even liked Qi Rongji more than her. The most important person in today's banquet was Qi Rongji. But because of old Madame's disturbance, it seemed that even Qi Rongji had to make up for Qin Yuru. "Grandma, there were a lot of scars on Big Sister's hands before. It is said that Madame D beat Big Sister so that there were a lot of scars on Big Sister's body. Moreover, Madame D beat Big Sister last night. There were not only bruises on her hands, but also many bloodstains, which looked very scary." Qin Wanru whispered. "This happened last night?" Old Madame Qin said dumbfoundedly. Although she had heard a word or two just now, it was not clear. Later, she had no chance to ask. At this time, after hearing the whole story clearly, she almost couldn't believe her ears. Did Madame D beat Yuru so hard? Although Madame D was vicious, she had always been obedient to Qin Yuru. When did she beat Qin Yuru so hard? It can't be, right? Shui Rulan also shook her head. She also didn't believe it. "Grandma, others said that Big Sister is not Madame D's biological daughter. They said that she was picked up. If she was the biological mother, how could she beat her daughter so hard?" After Big Sister showed her scars, she didn't say anything bad about Madame D. Instead, she has been defending Madame D. Many people think that Big Sister has a noble character. Qin Wanru said again. Her watery eyes turned quietly, and there was a deep look in her eyes. There were some things that she couldn't say before, but now she could say it. Since there was such a chance, she wanted to find out more information. Even if her mother didn't know it, her grandma must know something. The thing about Qin Yuru slowly tore open some old veils, and then she would slowly penetrate it, picked up. Who said that? Old Madame Qin was furious after hearing it clearly. Grandma, lower your voice. Everyone is guessing so, and not only one person said so. Qin Wanru gently pulled old Madame Qin's hand and comforted her. Anyone can be picked up, but Yuru can't be picked up. Madame D can't wait to give the whole Qin's mansion to Yuru's dowry. Even if the whole Qin's mansion is in trouble, she won't let anything happen to Qin Yuru. Old Madame Qin snorted coldly. Grandma, previously my father said that Duke Yong's mansion wanted to say that Big Sister's age was 2 years younger, saying that it was for Big Sister's reputation. Now someone said that Big Sister was picked up. Is there any connection between them? Qin Wanru frowned slightly and said with a confused look. These two things sounded unrelated. If Qin Wanru didn't link them together, old grandma wouldn't think of anything even if she knew it. At this time, she couldn't help thinking along Qin Wanru's line of thought. Suddenly, she had a flash of inspiration. Her face changed dramatically, and she almost fell. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to hold old grandma and said in a low voice, Grandma. She put her hand on old grandma's pulse and felt it. When she found out that it was just because of the shock, she was relieved. "Grandma, are you okay?" Chapter 325. After old Madame Qin ate a little, she got up and said goodbye. No matter how Madame of Duke Xing asked her to stay, she only said that she was not feeling well and had to go back early. Seeing old Madame Qin's obviously pale face, Madame of Duke Xing did not want to stay and immediately asked someone to send them out. When people of Qin's mansion were going to leave, Qin Yuru naturally could not stay, so she could only go out with old Madame Qin. The old maid of Duke Xing's mansion led the way all the way to the parking space of Duke Xing's mansion. Along the way, Qin Yuru kept a straight face and ignored old Madame Qin's words. It was obvious that she was annoyed with old Madame Qin. Old Madame Qin had something on her mind and was outside, so it was not appropriate for her to argue with her. They were the first guests to leave. At this time, no one else had left. Along the way, they only met a few servant girls and old maids, but no one else. When they arrived at the parking place, they encountered another problem. They came out too early, and the carriage that was parked before was too far inside, so they had to readjust it. The old maid who led the way asked people of Qin's mansion to rest in the pavilion on the side, and the coachman slowly dispatched the carriages from the innermost area. A carriage suddenly squeezed out of the group of carriages, turned around in front of them, and left in a hurry. Along the way, no womenfolk left earlier than them, but they did not know who it was. Everyone couldn't help but look at the carriage. "Mother, it seems to be the carriage of Duke Yong's mansion." With her sharp eyes, Shu Rulan immediately saw the sign on the carriage and whispered, "It's impossible. How could my cousin leave at this time?" Qin Yuru was stunned for a moment and retorted. At this time, the carriage had gone far away, and they could not see whether it was true or not. "Yes, it's from Duke Yong's mansion." Qin Wanru nodded and said affirmatively. "How could it be possible? You must have seen it wrong." Qin Yuru still did not want to believe it, and glared at Qin Wanru and said, "Big sister, did you see Miss D just now?" Qin Wanru asked calmly. Qin Yuru couldn't answer for a while. Just now, she only paid attention to the conversation between Madame of Duke Xing and her, so she didn't care about Di Fenglan at all. "When I was in the yard, I met a servant who came to find Miss D. He said that the heir of the Duke was drunk and came to invite Miss D. Then he left with Miss D in a hurry. It seems that something happened to the heir of the Duke." Qin Wanru looked at the direction where the carriage went and guessed. "Impossible." Qin Wanru denied with a pale face. She tore the handkerchief in her hand fiercely a few times, and a surge of annoyance surged in her heart. She was getting more and more annoyed with Di Yan. He was a guest, but how could he drink so much before the banquet started? He even asked Di Fenglan to serve him. It could be seen how drunk he was. "Yuru, did your mother hit you?" Old Madame Qin frowned, looked around, and coughed in a low voice. Just now, the old maid of Duke Xing's mansion had been following them, so it was not convenient for old Madame to say anything. "I." Qin Yuru's hand shrank back. "Let Grandma have a look." Old Madame said gently and reached out to hold Qin Yuru's hand. Qin Yuru panicked and pushed hard. Old Madame was not prepared and almost fell down. Fortunately, Qin Wanru was on the side and supported her quickly. "Big sister, why did you push Grandma?" After supporting old Madame, Qin Wanru said coldly. I didn't mean it. Grandma, I'm sorry. What you said just now scared me." Qin Yuru also knew that her behavior was inappropriate. She laughed dryly and apologized to old Madame Qin. "Yuru, have you been beaten by your mother so badly that people suspect that your mother is not your biological mother?" Old Madame Qin looked at Qin Yuru with a serious face, and the expression on her face became cold. "Grandma, what are you talking about? I don't understand what you mean." Qin Yuru pretended to be ignorant. After that, she sat down on a fence far away from old Madame. She looked in the direction where the carriage of Duke Yong's mansion disappeared and frowned slightly, as if she was really worried about Di Yen. Yuru, tell Grandma the truth. Why did you do this? Old Madam did not intend to let Qin Yuru go this time. She looked at her and continued to ask. Grandma, I don't know what you mean. I just said that I made my mother angry and she hit me casually. It's not a big deal. Why don't you let it go? Seeing that Old Madam did not intend to let her go, Qin Yuru couldn't help but feel annoyed. She turned to look at Old Madam and said unhappily. Grandma, don't you care about second sister most in the past? Why do you care about me today? It's not a big deal. You don't need to care about it. Qin Yuru squinted at Old Madam Qin indifferently. Her expression looked so contemptuous. Old Madam was so angry that she couldn't even speak. Yuru, how can you talk to Grandma like that? Shui Rulan scolded in a low voice. How can I talk like that? What I said is the truth. It's not a big deal. Why do you interrogate me together? Do you want me to admit that my mother hit me badly? Then you will be satisfied. Qin Yuru choked. Qin Yuru's words were not only rude, but also had a strong sense of malice. Looking at Qin Yuru like this, Qin Wanru sneered in her heart. Qin Yuru felt that she had a solid foundation, so she even dared to say such words. In the last life, Qin Yuru had arrogantly bullied her in front of her grandmother, just because she had the support of Duke Xing's mansion. There were even a few times when his grandmother fainted from anger. Yuru, how can you talk to Rulan like that? Old Madam was so angry that her voice even trembled. Why can't I do that? Who is she? She is just a widow who doesn't abide by women's morality. Do I have to flatter her? She doesn't know who she is. How dare she enter the gate of our Qin's mansion? Qin Yuru sneered. She had been suppressed for a long time recently. At this time, she really felt that she could turn over. Well, I won't talk to you now. I will talk to your father and see what kind of daughter he raised. Old Madam was so angry that her face was as pale as snow. Shui Rulan was ashamed and couldn't say anything for a while. Qin Wanru reached out to hold Old Madam's hand and gently pinched her wrist twice. Then she raised her head to look at Qin Yuru and said coldly, Big sister, do you think that you are the first miss of Duke Xing's mansion because you have been treated well by Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion? Unfortunately, you can only be the miss of Qin's mansion. Do you want to change your parents? What nonsense are you talking about? Being stared at by Qin Wanru's bright watery eyes, Qin Yuru had a feeling of being seen through. She rolled her eyes guiltily and said, and then turned her hand as if to show off. When she went out just now, the pair of jade bracelets had been put on her hands, and when she turned them, they made a crisp sound. It is my blessing that Old Madam of Duke Xing's mansion likes me. Second sister, are you jealous? Even if you are jealous, it has nothing to do with you. The sound of the bracelets immediately reminded Qin Yuru of her current identity. After she was recognized by Duke Xing's mansion, there was also Rui and Great Elder Princess's mansion. At that time, Qin Wanru would be easily trampled on by her. How could she compare with her? Thinking of this, she became more and more confident in her heart. She slightly raised her eyes and squinted at Qin Wanru. Her provocative attitude was really unbearable. However, this kind of provocation only left a faint coldness in Qin Wanru's eyes. What is the relationship between Big Sister and Madame D and Duke Xing's mansion? Why does Madame of Duke Xing think so highly of you? First, it is not Madame D's guess. Next, Big Sister deliberately reported that she is 2 years younger. Is it related to Old Madam's favor today? All her plans were fiercely pulled apart by Qin Wanru unexpectedly. Qin Yuru was shocked. Her pink lips immediately became pale, and even her lips trembled a few times. What are you talking about? I don't understand what you are saying. Her words and her face showed that she was trying to cover up the guilt. Madame Dowager's eyes fell on Qin Yuru's guilty face. She only felt her heart was heavy and almost suppressed to breathe. Her eyes were slightly red. There was a kind of unspeakable anger that almost made her want to slap Madame D. She suddenly understood Madame D's plot. She reached out to hold Qin Wanru's hand tightly, and her hand was trembling slightly. She understood. She actually understood it all at once. It suddenly became strangely quiet in the pavilion. No one spoke. This quiet atmosphere was maintained until the carriage of Qin's mansion squeezed out of the group of carriages, and the coachman came to invite the masters to get on. It was still old Madame Qin and Shui Rulin in the same carriage, and the guests were Qin Wanru and Qin Yuru in the same carriage. After everyone got on the carriage slowly went out from the side door of Duke Xing's mansion. The carriage in front belonged to old Madame Qin and Shui Rulin. Since Madame Dowager, who leaned against the carriage wall, got on the carriage, she still didn't say a word, but her face was a little pale. "Mother, are you okay? Don't mind her. Yuru is still a child. She is not sensible enough to talk nonsense." Shui Rulin suppressed her thoughts and comforted Madame Dowager in a low voice. "Rulin, do you think Madame D wants to see Zhuozhuo's family background?" Madame Dowager said slowly after a long time without saying anything. "Wanru's family background? Mother, what do you mean?" Shui Rulin asked in confusion. She had asked Madame Dowager about this in private before, but Madame Dowager always changed the topic and didn't say anything. This was the first time that she talked about Qin Wanru's family background with Shui Rulin. "Yes, Zhuozhuo's family background." Old Madame Qin sighed. "In fact, I don't know who Zhuozhuo's biological parents are, but I have seen them, but..." Chapter 326. What kind of people are Wanru's parents? Shui Rulin's heart skipped a beat, and her face turned slightly pale, but she still followed Madame Dowager's tone and asked. That year, the rebel army rebelled, and the border was in a state of emergency. Several cities even fell into the hands of the rebel army. There were refugees everywhere, and some troops were mobilized. Zhuozhuo's father was transferred here at that time. Because of the urgency of the war, he temporarily lived in our mansion after he came, old Madame Qin recalled, and her eyes fell on a place in the air, with a slight bitterness in her eyes. At that time, everyone was in danger. No one knew if the rebel army would take over the city. The previous cities had all been breached in the end. The city was filled with civilians and the families of some soldiers who had fled to the city. Qin Wanru's father was transferred to Qin Huayong at that time. Because there was no place to live, he temporarily lived in the Qin's mansion. Old Madame Qin also saw the elegant and beautiful woman at that time. That was Qin Wanru's mother. She was still pregnant at that time, so it was not very obvious. Because she was frightened, she tightly held the hand of little Qin Wanru wherever she went. At that time, Qin Wanru was only called Zhuozhuo, only a nickname, not a full name. It was said that she had not asked the elders of the family to give her a name. Because she had not contacted her family for a long time at the border, the child's name was not given. When she returned to the capital, she would ask the elders to give her a name. It was at that time that old Madame Qin liked to tease Qin Wanru and called her Zhuozhuo after the young and elegant madam. Although this madam never mentioned her family background, judging from her elegant behavior and dignified appearance, she knew that her family background was extraordinary. After living in the Qin's mansion for a few days, it was said that someone from the capital came to pick them up. Qin Wanru's biological father asked this lady to take his daughter away first, saying that he would return to the capital later. On the day of parting, he was reluctant to part, which showed that they had a very good relationship. Unexpectedly, when they went out of the city, a wave of rebel army rushed in, and the mother and daughter were separated. Qin Wanru's father frantically looked for them, but he only found Qin Wanru, and there was no news of the elegant and noble lady. The rebel army attacked the city, and the people in the city were in a panic. A weak woman with a few servant girls was washed away somewhere. Old Madam Qin comforted Qin Wanru's biological father at that time, saying that the servant girls would be fine. Maybe they had already returned to the capital city. Only then did her father feel at ease, but he still did not give up looking for them. Not long after, something happened to Qin Wanru's biological father. A spy opened the east gate and the rebel army rushed in. Qin Huayong and Qin Wanru's biological father rushed out to fight against the enemy and entrusted Qin Wanru to old Madam Qin. Fearing that the rebel army would also occupy the city, old Madam Qin and Qin Wanru carried a parcel and sneaked out of the city. There was a courtyard of the Qin's mansion outside the city. They would hide there for a while. Qin Wanru left with old Madam Qin at that time. And this departure was an eternal farewell to her biological father. When the two armies fought, there was a stray arrow flying over the city. Qin Wanru's biological father blocked an arrow for Qin Huayong and died himself. But before he died, he entrusted his only daughter to Qin Huayong, and Qin Huayong promised to treat her as his own daughter and raise her well. After that, Qin Huayong blocked the rebel army, beat the rebel army out of the city, and defended the city. For this, the emperor conferred him the title of Ningyuan Army General and transferred him to Jiangzhou to become the highest-ranking officer there. And Madame D, who had escaped early, also came to Jiangzhou with her daughter. After that, the Qin's mansion had two daughters. When Madame D learned that Qin Wanru's father died to save Qin Huayong, she repeatedly promised that she would treat Qin Wanru as her own daughter. Only Qin Yuru had, Qin Wanru would also have. Even if Qin Yuru did not have, Madame D would let Qin Wanru have. Those sincere words made old Madame feel relieved. She thought that Madame D was also a lady from a noble family and she would treat Qin Wanru well. Therefore, she registered Qin Wanru under the name of Madame D and became the other daughter of Madame D. The Qin's mansion was not originally in Jiangzhou. Since the Qin's mansion said that they had two daughters, everyone naturally thought that Madame D had two daughters. In fact, Qin Wanru was not the daughter of the Qin's mansion. At that time, there was a fenghua glazed cup in Qin Wanru's bag. Madame D had seen it before. Originally, Madame D wanted to keep it in her hands, but old grandma thought about it and put it away for her. Later, she wanted to secretly find out Qin Wanru's origin through this fenghua glazed cup. However, she couldn't find it. Fenghua glazed cup was rare, but it was not non-existent. There were also fenghua glazed cups in the big aristocratic families in Jiangzhou. After several years, she couldn't find it, so old grandma sent this fenghua glazed cup to Jingshin Monastery and worshipped it in front of the Buddha. Since then, she raised Qin Wanru as her own granddaughter. After so many years, no one came to find Qin Wanru. She must have no relatives. That madam should have died in the war. In this case, there was no need to let this child know her origin. It was also a kind of happiness not to know that she could live a happy life. Old grandma thought so. Because she pitied Qin Wanru for the death of her parents and Qin Huayong, she was very good to Qin Wanru and even treated her as the pearl in the palm. However, she didn't expect that Madame D would be so vicious. Not only did she not treat Qin Wanru as her own daughter, but she also secretly wanted to kill Qin Wanru. Thinking of this, old Madame Qin's tears fell down. Was it all her fault? Why did things go so wrong? She just wanted Zhuozhuo to be happy. After hearing old grandma's words, Shui Rulan's heart was also very heavy, as if something was pressing heavily in her heart. She didn't feel relieved because of old grandma's words. She bit her lip and suppressed the sadness in her heart. After a long while, she found her voice and said, "Mother, do you think Yuru and sister did this to take Wanru's identity?" Old grandma wiped her tears with a handkerchief and looked calm. In our mansion, only Wanru is not Yong's biological daughter, and Wanru is younger than Yuru. But now there is a rumor that Yuru is not Madame D's biological daughter. Based on Madame D's character, how could she beat Yuru like this? Moreover, Yuru is not a person who is willing to suffer losses. If she was really beaten by Madame D, she would definitely make trouble. After saying these words in her heart for so many years, old grandma felt her heart was not so heavy after saying them out. She also increasingly felt that there was something wrong with Qin Yuru today. Rulin, do you think Zhuozhuo's origin has something to do with Duke Xing's mansion? Madame D knew it, so she tried to get Fenghua glazed cup from me. Old grandma asked in a low voice. Connecting the causes and effects, even if old grandma had never thought about it before, she couldn't help thinking about it at this time. Madame D knew more about the relationship in the capital city than her. Judging from the appearance of Qin Wanru's parents on that day, they seemed to be the children of aristocratic families in the capital city who went out to the capital city to gain experience. As for why they didn't communicate with the capital city for many years and even didn't name their daughter, old grandma Qin couldn't guess it. Mother, can I ask someone to inquire about Duke Xing's mansion? Shui Rulin thought for a while and said. Okay, that's the only way. Old grandma nodded. After thinking for a while, she said, you can do it in private. Don't let others know. And don't tell Yong about it for the time being. Yes, mother, I know. Shui Rulin forced a smile and her voice was a little choked with sobs. She slowly lowered her head. Old grandma sighed and patted Shui Rulin's thin shoulder. Even though she was pregnant, Shui Rulin didn't seem to put on weight, which made people feel that she was getting thinner. Rulin, remember to tell me if there's anything. Even if I may not be able to help you, at least I will be by your side and try my best not to let you be wronged. Her words made Shui Rulin's tears fall down one by one. She reached out to hold old grandma. Thousands of words seemed to be on the tip of her tongue, but she choked for a few times and still didn't say them out. Old grandma Qin sighed, took her hand and gently patted it a few times to appease her. Then she frowned and thought, did Madame D really find Zhuozhuo's relatives? If so, she would never let Madame D and her daughter get what they want. For so many years, Madame D didn't treat Zhuozhuo as her biological daughter. Now she wanted to take away Zhuozhuo's biological relatives. Old grandma couldn't hide her anger, the carriage behind also moved slowly. In the carriage, Qin Yuru proudly turned the blood jade bracelet in her hand. She looked up at Qin Wanru, who also looked at her hand, and sneered. Do you feel very envious? I don't. Qin Wanru said lightly. Qin Yuru, you stole Qi Rongji's limelight today. Aren't you afraid that Qi Rongji will slap you again? These words reminded Qin Yuru of the humiliating scene, and her face immediately became livid. Qi Rongji really thinks that she is in the mood? The eyes of Madame of Duke Xing. She just took it casually. What about you? Do you also think that you are in the eyes of old Madame of Duke Xing? Qin Wanru raised her eyes and looked at her with a little mockery in her watery eyes, which made Qin Yuru feel despised. She couldn't help retorting angrily, of course, old Madame of Duke Xing will like me, and I will enter Duke Xing's mansion in the future. Is there any difference between you and Qi Rongji? Qin Wanru interrupted her eyes. Her long eyelashes fluttered twice, and her red lips curved. Of course it is different. Qi Rongji is not the real. Being despised by Qin Wanru, Qin Yuru was so angry that her face turned red. Are you the real one? Qin Wanru rudely interrupted her again. How can I not be the real one? Qin Yuru quickly retorted. Don't say it. Do you still think that you are the lineal granddaughter of Duke Xing's mansion? You are so imaginative. Qin Wanru interrupted her again this time. She raised her head to look out of the window and said to herself, it's still daytime. Why am I dreaming? Chapter 327. Yujie reached out to block Qin Yuru and stared at Qin Yuru coldly, which made Qin Yuru even more annoyed. Even a servant girl dared to be so arrogant. When she returned to the mansion, she would definitely break the legs of Qin Wanru's servant girl. Qin Wanru's eyes flashed with disgust. She had always been very clear about Qin Yuru and Madame D's feelings. In the last life, they did do it and finally pushed her step by step into the abyss of blood. Qin Yuru, wait and see. Ignoring Qin Yuru, she closed her watery eyes and ignored Qin Yuru. Hey, Qin Wanru. Qin Yuru became more and more annoyed and aggrieved. Now she returned to her hometown in glory, but Qin Wanru ignored her, which made her feel like punching on cotton. Qin Wanru turned sideways and turned her back to her, still ignoring her. Qin Wanru, how dare you ignore me? Qin Yuru said angrily and reached out to push Qin Wanru again. Stop the carriage. Qin Wanru suddenly turned around and looked at Qin Yuru coldly, which scared Qin Yuru so much that she withdrew her hand. Tell the coachman that I want to change the carriage and go to the front to sit with Grandma. Qin Wanru told Yujie. Yujie nodded and told the outside. The carriage stopped, and she pushed the door and jumped out of the carriage first. Qin Yuru, don't think that you are really the daughter of the lineal descent of Duke Xing's mansion and you are Madame D's biological daughter. Do you want me to ask my father to go to Jiangzhou to find some witnesses to prove that you are Madame D's biological daughter? Don't think that you are really the miss of Duke Xing's mansion after taking a pair of bracelets. Not to mention that it was fake, even if it was true, Qin Wanru would not be afraid. Qin Wanru sneered mercilessly and reached out to grab Qin Yuru's wrist. The jade bracelet on it was blood red, which was obviously a good thing. Qin Wanru reached out to pull it hard and the jade bracelet was pulled off by Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru, how dare you? Qin Yuru was so scared that her face changed. She held Qin Wanru's hand tightly, trying to take the jade bracelet back from her. Qin Wanru sneered at her and reached out to the outside of the car. Yujie hurriedly reached out to grab her and then exerted her strength. She had always been strong, which was not comparable to Qin Yuru. After getting Qin Wanru's hint, Yujie pulled hard and immediately pulled Qin Wanru out of the car. Half of Qin Yuru's body was also pulled out. Big sister, don't pull me. I'm just going to sit in the front with Grandma. As soon as they got out of the car, Qin Wanru immediately said softly with some inexplicable grievances. Her voice was not loud, but it was loud enough for people passing by to hear. At this moment, they were passing by a bustling street. They stopped at a spot that happened to be in front of a jade shop. There were many people coming and going, and when they heard the commotion here, they all turned around to see what was going on. They saw an exquisite-looking young lady being pulled out of the carriage by a maid. She looked very wronged, but there was actually someone pulling her from behind. Although they couldn't see the face clearly, it should be a woman. Listening to the words of the young lady in front, it should be her elder sister. However, they didn't know what this elder sister had done to make her younger sister unable to sit in the carriage in front. But it seemed that she was unwilling to stop. They didn't know what had happened. Then, what shocked everyone was that a bracelet fell from the place where their hands crossed. The crisp sound of it breaking shocked everyone. When they saw the blood jade shards on the ground, those who knew their stuff felt that it was a pity. With one look, they could tell that the bracelet was worth a lot of money. It was such a pity that it broke just like that. The bracelet was broken. The bracelet that old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion gave to her today was broken. Qin Yuru was stunned. Her face turned blue, then white, and finally red. She suddenly grabbed Qin Wanru's hand and was about to lift her up. However, her strength was completely inferior to Yujie's. Qin Wanru had been half supported and half carried by Yujie to get off the carriage. Because she held Qin Wanru's hand tightly, she was also dragged off. Mei Shui saw that it was not good, so she hurriedly jumped off the carriage and helped her. Qin Wanru, how dare you break my bracelet? Qin Yuru stood firm with one hand holding Mei Shui's hand and slapped Qin Wanru's face hard. She was really mad. Such an important bracelet was not only valuable, but also a token given by old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. How could she break it like this? Big sister, I just want to go to Grandma's carriage in front. Why do you pull me? Now the bracelet is broken. Don't blame me. Qin Wanru took 2 steps back and happened to avoid Qin Yuru's hand. She said euphemistically. Although she was a little flustered, her behavior looked much more decent. Everyone looked at Qin Yuru, who held Qin Wanru's hand tightly. They couldn't help but have an idea. It was obvious that this elder sister insisted on pulling her younger sister and accidentally broke her bracelet. She intended to push the blame to her younger sister. They didn't know which mansion this miss came from. She was so unreasonable. Thinking of this, everyone's eyes fell on the symbol of Ningyuan Army General's mansion on the carriage. Some people who knew it had secretly spread the rumor that this carriage belonged to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. There were a lot of rumors about Ningyuan Army General's mansion in the capital city recently. Immediately, someone whispered in a low voice. This second miss is not the daughter of General Qin. That is to say, she is an orphan without parents. I heard that this first miss is a vicious person. She even forced her fiancé's cousin to die. One look and you can tell that he's a mean and vicious person. Look, he's forcing his younger sister to stay in the carriage and not let her get off. He's unlucky enough to break the bracelet, and now he's blaming his younger sister. I heard that this first miss is the daughter of Madame D. Madame D is even more vicious. She actually wanted to kill this second Mississippi. She even asked her servants to do it secretly. This matter had caused a disturbance in the penalty hall before. Later, it should be the power of Duke Yong's mansion that suppressed this matter. Are you serious? How could there be such a vicious woman? Of course it's true. If you don't believe me, you can ask around. Although this matter has been suppressed, many people know it. Like mother, like daughter. One look and I can tell that both mother and daughter are vicious. She heard the words of the crowd. Some were loud, and some were low. Someone deliberately raised his voice and passed it to Qin Yuru. Qin Yuru was so angry that she almost went crazy. Qin Wanru, how dare you set me up? Qin Yuru was trembling with anger. She gnashed her teeth and glared at Qin Wanru. Big sister, this bracelet really has nothing to do with me. But if you must blame me, I will go back and sell all my jewelry, and then buy a pair of bracelets for you. Qin Wanru raised her watery eyes, which were full of sincerity and kindness, and said helplessly. She didn't evade the responsibility too much. Although everyone could see that it was the first miss who fell herself, the second miss still promised to take the responsibility. In addition, her pure eyes really made people feel that the second Miss Qin was dignified and decent, and she also took the overall situation into consideration. Bitch. Qin Wanru was so angry that she laughed. She only felt that all the reason in her mind was smashed away by Qin Wanru's pure and kind eyes. She reached out and slapped Qin Wanru's face hard. If eyes could tear people, Qin Wanru would have been torn by her vicious eyes. Yujie took a step forward and stood in front of Qin Yuru. She tilted her head very cleverly, and this slap landed on her face. It seemed that the slap was very heavy, and her head was tilted, but in fact, it was less than 1/10 of the previous slap on her face. First miss. Yujie reached out to cover her face and looked at Qin Yuru with grievance. She still stood in front of Qin Yuru and did not give way. Our second miss said that she will compensate you for the bracelet. Don't make trouble. Yujie's face was pale. Her face immediately turned red, which looked very creepy. Get out of my way. Qin Yuru reached out to pull Yujie and pushed her to the side. Yujie was pushed and staggered a few times. Qin Wanru hurriedly reached out to pull her and wanted to pull Qin Yuru's hand away. But she was small and weak, so she staggered forward with Yujie. First miss, please let me go. Yujie tried hard to stabilize her body, but Qin Yuru was so strong at this time that she pulled both of them forward. A woman in the crowd could not stand it anymore. No one knew who was the first to come out to help and pull Qin Yuru away. Another person came to block Qin Yuru. When it was a mess, there was another crisp cracking sound. The crowd suddenly stopped and looked at the ground in astonishment. Another blood bracelet was broken into several pieces on the ground. Chin Yuru's face was as pale as snow, and she could hardly stand. Her whole body was tottering. Unexpectedly, another bracelet was broken. She worked hard to get the bracelet, which was going to help her embark on the road to a high position, but it was broken like this. How could she bear this? She raised her head and looked at Chin Wanru with bloodshot eyes. Stop quarreling, Yuru. When we go back, I will give you another pair. The mess here had already alarmed Madame Dowager. After stopping the carriage, Madame Dowager rushed back with Shui Rulan. When she saw the mess in front of her, she immediately said with a sullen face. Grandma, it's this bitch. At this time, what Chin Yuru wanted most was to throw herself at Chin Wanru and slap her hard. Yuru, mind your identity. Madame Dowager's face became colder and colder. She waved to Chin Wanru and said, Zhuozhua, come to Grandma. Yes, Grandma. Chin Wanru seemed to be also frightened. Her face was slightly pale, and the corners of her lips were also a little pale. She responded softly and turned to walk to Madame Dowager. Chin Wanru, stop right there. Chin Yuru slapped Chin Wanru's back hard. She couldn't take this lying down. Yujia stood in front of Chin Wanru again and staggered after being hit. She turned back and cried out in pain while covering her back, First Miss. Yuru, have you had enough? Seeing Chin Yuru making a scene on the street without a care for propriety, Madame Dowager was really angry and scolded her sternly. Nanny Duan hurried over and lowered her voice to persuade her, First Miss, you have made a fool of yourself by making such a scene. Anyway, the bracelet is broken. If you have something to do, you can solve it when you go back. Pick up the broken pieces and go. Seeing that more and more people were gathering, Chin Yuru also knew that she could not make a scene at this time. She could only bite her teeth and said to Mei Shui in a stern voice. She pushed her hard and Mei Shui also staggered and fell to the ground. Chapter 328. Chin Wanru got on Madame Dowager's carriage, and Chin Yuru got on the carriage behind. The carriage moved forward slowly. The crowd let go of the carriage and watched it go away. Then they began to talk about the two misses of Chin's mansion in groups. The more arrogant the first miss was, the more pitiful the second miss was. Sure enough, they didn't take her seriously because she was not their biological daughter. Looking at her, they knew how pitiful the second miss was in the mansion. But even so, she was not rude. Everyone thought that Chin Yuru's bracelet was broken, and she deserved it. No one felt sorry for her, and no one sympathized with her, even though her eyes were red when she left. On the upper floor of the jade shop, the window by the street was open. Someone looked down with his hands clasped behind his back. His eyes were cold, and he happened to see the farce below. Prince, do you want to take a rest? You must be tired after standing for so long. A little eunuch reminded him in a low voice. He peeped down, but didn't see clearly who was in the crowd. Chin's mansion. Chu Luiyue slowly left the window and sat down on a chair. People of Chin's mansion. Which Chin's mansion? The little eunuch following him didn't understand what he meant. There were many mansions with the surname Chin's mansion in the capital city. The two daughters of Ningyuan army general's mansion are really different. Chu Luiyue clicked his tongue and reached out to press his chest. He was really injured, but his injury was worse than he had imagined. It was originally a self-directed and self-acted play, but an assassin really sneaked in and almost killed him. As long as he thought of this, he felt a dull pain in his chest, and his face became more and more gloomy. Have you found out who the assassin is? I couldn't find anything. The assassin is already dead. But he is one of our people. The little eunuch lowered his head and reported. Our people. Our people will want this king's life. With a pale face, Chu Luiyue coughed in a low voice and said, not only me, but also my second brother, third brother and fourth brother. Everyone is in trouble. Either someone is deliberately stirring up trouble, or someone is watching us secretly. Your Highness, could it be Prince Shou? As for Prince Chen and Prince Xian, he automatically ignored them. Prince Xian seemed to be immature. As for Prince Chen, he was so sick that he was about to die. Who would worry about him? Previously, his master only chased after Prince Chen because he was afraid that the former emperor had left some men for Prince Chen. As for Prince Chen himself, he really had no deterrence. Doesn't look like it. Chu Luiyue shook his head. He had also investigated that Chu Liuzhou was the cause of Chu Liuchen's death. If Chu Liuchen was really dead, Chu Liuzhou couldn't explain it even if he had 100 mouths. From this point of view, neither the Empress nor Chu Liuzhou would send people from Prince Zhou's mansion to kill Chu Liuchen. It was not good for Chu Liuzhou to anger the Empress Dowager and his father. If it's not the princes, who else could it be? The young eunuch was at a loss and had no clue. This time, all the princes had been injured and had been sent to the Imperial Academy of Medicine to recuperate. Today, it was his own prince who had insisted that he had to go back to his fu to get some important things, so he had to go back to the palace to recuperate. Of course, the so-called recuperation was not just to recuperate. The emperor must be investigating this matter. The princes were all in the palace. On the one hand, it was to protect them, on the other hand, it was to monitor them. The little eunuch was Chu Liuyue's henchman, so he certainly knew the meaning. There is one more. Chu Liyue suddenly smiled. An extremely cold smile appeared on his face, which was cold all year round. I didn't think of it at first, but now we are all injured. If there is anyone who can benefit from it, it is only him. Your Highness, you are right. The little eunuch gasped and also thought of someone. Who else but him? If something happens to us, the throne will fall on him. What a good plan. No one has found out for so many years. Chu Liyue sneered and praised. The little eunuch didn't dare to continue and carefully lowered his head. Have you found out the relationship between Qin Wanru and Chu Liuchen? Chu Liyue didn't say anything. After a long while, he suddenly changed the topic. Yes. When Prince Chen was in Jiangzhou, he once lived in Ningyuan Army General's mansion. He should know second Miss Qin at this time. The little eunuch raised his head and said. The assassination of the princes was originally caused by Qin Wanru. He just knows her, but he is so enthusiastic to help. Third brother has never been so enthusiastic to help others, or he doesn't know what enthusiasm is. Chu Liyue snorted and said casually. What do you mean, Your Highness? The little eunuch blinked and didn't understand his master's meaning. Find out whether Chu Liuchen likes second Miss Qin. Chu Liyue said slowly and his eyes became more and more cold. Your Highness, second Miss Qin is so young. The little eunuch was stunned and said. He was the personal eunuch who accompanied Chu Liyue. He had seen Qin Wanru in Jiangzhou. She was so young. Was she still a child? She looks different now. She has grown up so fast after staying in the capital city for such a short time. A pure and delicate little face flashed in Chu Liyue's eyes. He just saw it. Even in such a situation, she was still decent and gentle. She was a rare girl. It was a loss for her to be with third brother. He was a sick child who was in a precarious situation. Yes, Your Highness, I will go to find out. The little eunuch nodded and was about to leave, but was stopped by Chu Liyue. Don't go to find out. It is not so easy to find out about third brother. If he notices it and reports it to father and grandmother, I will be reprimanded again. He really didn't dare to inquire about the news of Chu Liuchen. There were guards at the door, and it was not easy to inquire about it. Moreover, these guards were all his father's men. Even if he occasionally planted one or two of his men, he didn't get any information in the end. Once, he even let the invalid get something on him and reported it to his father. Chu Luiyue still remembered his father's anger. Go to find out about Qin Huayong. I heard that he has been doing well recently and has a good relationship with people in the capital city. Chu Luiyue thought for a while and said. He had another guess in his mind. He also felt that it was not easy for Chu Luchen to help Qin Wanru. Maybe he could also find out about Qin Huayong. It was not convenient to find out about Chu Luchen, so he changed the direction. Yes, I will ask someone to find out about it. The little eunuch nodded and left. When he passed by a guard at the door, he saw the guard hurriedly go up. The little eunuch thought for a while and followed up. Now there was only his master upstairs, and the little eunuch was worried. Prince, I found something about the dead coachman. The guard entered the door and knelt down respectfully to Chu Luiyue, and presented the scroll in his hand. Chu Luiyue reached out to take it and read the scroll in his hand. His face was cold. After a long time, he sneered and said, "It is related to Duke Yong's mansion." The guard knew that Chu Luiyue didn't really ask him, so he kept quiet and didn't answer. Duke Yong's mansion. Go and find out about Duke Yong's mansion. Put aside the matter of Qin's mansion. It is not a big deal. Chu Luiyue raised his voice and said to the little eunuch. Looking at his master's face, the little eunuch knew that his master was really angry, so he nodded and hurriedly left. After giving orders, he went upstairs again to help his master out of the building, and then got on the spacious carriage behind the building. The carriage went all the way to the imperial palace. Father, this bracelet was given to me by old Madam of Duke Xing, but it was broken by my second sister. Father, please help me. Qin Yuru and Qin Wanru, Madame Dowager, and Shui Rulan all stood in Qin Huayong's study. Qin Yuru pointed at Qin Wanru and said angrily. With red eyes, Mei Shui presented the fragments in the handkerchief to Qin Huayong's desk. Wanru, what happened? Why did you break your elder sister's bracelet? Qin Huayong looked at the bracelet that had been broken into several pieces, and his face darkened. Yong, you can't blame Zhuozhuo. It was Yuru who was rude and made trouble. She quarreled with Wanru on the street, and then drove Wanru out of the carriage. After that, she went to pull Wanru and broke the bracelet. After that, she wanted to hit Zhuozhuo. A passerby couldn't bear to stop them and broke the other bracelet in the push. Madame Dowager put down the cup in her hand heavily and was very dissatisfied with Qin Huayong's attitude. Mother, this is the bracelet given by old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. Qin Huayong reached out and rubbed his eyebrows with a headache, only feeling very tired. Yuru broke it and blamed it on Zhuozhuo. At that time, many people saw it. If you don't believe it, you can ask someone to ask. Madame Dowager said with a little anger. Mother, I don't mean that. I mean this bracelet belongs to old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. What should we do now? How can we remedy it? Qin Huayong said in a low voice. Since it happened, we should naturally tell Duke Xing's mansion, so that next time when Yuru wears it, she will say that it is gone. We should be honest. Madame Dowager also frowned. I don't want it. It is obviously Qin Wanru who broke it. Why should I be blamed? Qin Yuru objected in a shrill voice and reached out to point at Qin Wanru opposite. It seemed that she was going to rush over again. Yuru, you know best what is going on. It is useless even if you bite Zhuozhuo. There are too many people who saw it. Now the whole capital city should have heard it. Madame Dowager said coldly. She was very dissatisfied with Qin Yuru's unreasonable behavior. Grandma, you are too partial. I am your biological granddaughter. Seeing Madame Dowager defending Qin Wanru again, Qin Yuru shouted angrily. Of course I am your biological grandmother, so I can't let you be estranged from each other. It is just a pair of bracelets. Even if you want to compensate it, it has a price. I can make the decision. You should compensate for the bracelets together. Each of you should pay for one bracelet, and I will ask someone to buy similar ones. Madame Dowager said with a headache. Qin Huayong fell silent. This was already an excellent plan. It would not delay the matter and could let Qin Yuru have a new pair of jade bracelets. So be it. Qin Huayong said helplessly. Chapter 329. It turned out to be Shui Rulan's voice. No one in the room expected that Shui Rulan would say such tough words. All along, Shui Rulan had always been gentle and weak. Whether she married into the Qin's mansion or not, she did not have a strong sense of existence in the mansion. She basically did not object to the decisions made by Madame Dowager and Qin Huayong. She rarely objected publicly. Even when Qin Huayong frowned and looked at her, she still looked at Qin Huayong. Everyone could see the anger on her face and her soft eyes were full of anger. Qin Wanru's heart skipped a beat and she quietly leaned to Shui Rulan. It was not good for Shui Rulan to be emotional because she was pregnant. Mother, husband, it is not Wanru's fault. So many people saw that it was Yuru who broke it. She drove Wanru out of the carriage on the street and then wanted to pull Wanru. She accidentally broke the bracelets. It is not Wanru's fault. If our mansion handles things like this, it will only be laughed at by others. Shui Rulan said. You are talking nonsense. It is Qin Wanru who broke my bracelets on purpose. I did not drive her out of the carriage. She wanted to get out of it herself. Qin Yuru could not hide the hatred in her heart. She glared at Shui Rulan and said loudly. Yuru, I know that you have always been favored in the mansion and my husband has always loved you. But so many people on the street saw it with their own eyes. Even if you say anything, others will have a public opinion. So far, it is not just a matter of a pair of broken bracelets. Although the bracelets are precious, is it more precious than your reputation? Shui Rulan turned to look at Qin Yuru and said. Nonsense. You are helping Qin Wanru. You are. Qin Yuru refused to stop and screamed. But her words were interrupted by Qin Huayong, who slammed the table hard. The room became strangely quiet. The teacup on the table was shaken and fell down, and the water overflowed. Yuru, go back and reflect on it. This is your business. Don't go out recently. Qin Huayong said coldly. Father, why do you treat me like this? Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion asked me to go to their mansion often to talk with her. Qin Yuru said loudly, unconvinced. In the past, she did not dare to confront Qin Huayong, but now it was different from the past. She was confident. Her mother said that with the favor of old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion, even her father would give in. Yuru, although old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion likes you, she is not related to us, so she can't intervene in the affairs of our mansion. Shui Rulan analyzed calmly. Shui Rulan, what do you mean? Are you jealous that I am favored by Madame Dowager, so you let Madame Dowager support my mother and push you down from the position of Madame? You're just a concubine, how can you compare to my mother? Qin Yuru was really mad. Things happened one after another, which made her eyes red. She said all the words that she could only say to Madame D in private in the past. She even pointed at Shui Rulan and screamed, not treating her as an elder at all. Slap her. Madame Dowager was also angry and said harshly. Nanny Duan, who stopped Qin Yuru before, raised her hand and gave Qin Yuru a slap. She said, First Miss, please calm down. They are all your elders, so you can't say such words. You old bitch. How dare you hit me? You're just relying on Madame Dowager. I'll beat you to death, you old bitch. Qin Yuru was so angry that she laughed. She slapped Nanny Duan hard in the face and scolded, so what if she is old grandma? She is not my father's biological mother. Do you think she can really control me? She even scolded Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager was so angry that her face turned pale. Her body shook and she almost fell. Madame Dowager, Madame Dowager. Nanny Duan was slapped in the face, but she had no time to care about Qin Yuru. She rushed forward to support Madame Dowager and patted her back. She was so anxious that her voice changed. The blue veins on Qin Huayong's forehead bulged. After he strode out, he slapped Qin Yuru hard in the face with a livid face. Qin Yuru only took 2 steps back and fell heavily on the ground. "Father, how dare you slap me?" Qin Yuru looked at Qin Huayong in disbelief. Her eyes turned red and tears fell down one by one. For so many years, Qin Huayong had never slapped her like this. Qin Yuru, who had always been in charge of the mansion, could not bear it. "Wah!" She burst into tears. "Come on, send the first miss back. From today on, she will study in the courtyard and cultivate her character. Let the etiquette instructor teach her every day. If she doesn't teach her well, she won't be allowed to leave the courtyard anymore." The blue veins on Qin Huayong's forehead twitched violently as he said sternly, "Yes, General." 2 rough old maids came over and pulled Qin Yuru's arms to go out. Father, how can you do this to me? I'm the future heir of Duke Yong's mansion, and I'm also the person old Madame of Duke Xing likes. Old Madame of Duke Xing said that she would let Madame of Duke Xing adopt me as her daughter and recommend me to Rui, and great elder princess." Qin Yuru also came to her senses at this time. She knew that it was not good. She struggled and screamed, without the dignity of a miss from an aristocratic family. Qin Huayong's face was as dark as water. He waved his hand hard. The 2 old maids did not hesitate anymore and pulled Qin Yuru out. Mei Shui hurriedly bowed to Qin Huayong and hurriedly chased after them. The room became quiet. Qin Wanru looked at the tips of her shoes motionlessly. Her long eyelashes fluttered twice, covering the coldness in her eyes. What happened today was a great blow to Qin Yuru, so she said so many words out of control. The pair of blood jade bracelets of old Madame of Duke Xing seemed to have guided her to a golden road. Her plot for many days was about to get the best result. At this time, it was the most easy for her to be impatient. Qin Yuru was in such a state of impatience and complacency before. But suddenly the blood jade bracelets were broken, and the road ahead suddenly became unknown. How could Qin Yuru not panic and not go crazy? What she said just now was extremely rude. If she was in any aristocratic family, her future would be ruined. But Qin's mansion was different. She was the only daughter of Qin Huayong and the fiancée of the heir of Duke Yong's mansion. Based on these 2 points, Qin Yuru could still plot. Qin Yuru finally came to her senses. Those 2 words were very meaningful. Qin Wanru found that although Qin Huayong's face did not change, his right hand, which was put aside, clenched hard. Qin Yuru could be valued by old Madame of Duke Xing and even let Madame of Duke Xing recognize Qin Yuru as her adopted daughter. This was enough to make Qin Yuru's value 100 times. As for the meaning of Rui and great elder princess, of course, it was not what she meant on the surface. Taking a deep breath, her long eyelashes fluttered. She could understand Qin Yuru's words because she was now basically sure that she was the daughter of the former heir of Duke Xing's mansion. But what about her father, Qin Huayong? He seemed to understand as well. Did that mean that he actually knew a little bit about it? This feeling was very sad, as if her heart was hit hard by something. It was very painful and sad. No matter in the last life or this life, Qin Wanru had always regarded Qin Huayong as her father. In the last life, she ended up in such a situation and couldn't even return home. Even at that time, she still felt that her father had his own difficulties. A married daughter was like spilled water. It was right that he couldn't control her. She was driven out of Deputy Prime Minister's mansion and had a bad reputation. The person in charge of the mansion was Madame D. Her father was a man and was in charge of the outer court. Even if she wanted to help her, she could not. But in fact, it was not what she thought at all. A hand slowly and firmly grasped Qin Wanru's hand. The slender fingers were very cold, but they firmly grasped her as if they wanted to give her strength, even though she herself was so delicate and powerless. She slightly raised her head and saw Shui Rulan's concerned face. Her face was snow-white and a little fragile. Shui Rulan was also a fragile woman. Seeing that Shui Rulan covered her stomach with one hand and held her with the other, her lips trembled with concern. But it was useless. She just held her hand tightly. The coldness in her heart seemed to have eased a little. She held Shui Rulan's hand backhandedly to give warmth to herself and Shui Rulan. Someone, asked the doctor to treat Madame Dowager. Qin Huayong returned to the desk and sat down. He reached out to touch his hand and said weakly, "I'm fine." "Huayong, I want to talk to you about this thing." At this time, Madame Dowager had recovered. She picked up the tea on the table with slightly trembling fingers and took a sip. Then she felt a little strength again. This pair of blood jade bracelets was given by old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. She couldn't break them for no reason without an explanation. "Yes, mother." Qin Huayong nodded and looked at Shui Rulan, who also looked pale. His voice became gentle. "Rulan, you are also tired. Now go to have a rest with Wanru. Mother and I will solve this problem. You don't have to worry about it." "Okay." Shui Rulan nodded. Qin Wanru reached out to help her and then followed her to go out carefully. Shui Rulan looked very bad. Her face was pale and her expression was dizzy. It seemed that she had suffered a big blow. It seemed that Qin Yuru could not let her suffer such a blow. Shui Rulan struggled to walk out of the courtyard. She couldn't stand it anymore and fell to the side. If Qin Wanru and Xianghua hadn't been paying attention to her, she might have fallen to the ground. "Go there and have a rest. Xianghua, go to find the doctor and ask him to bring some medicine for miscarriage. Yujie, bring my set of needles." Although Qin Wanru was sweating, she still ordered calmly. She nervously held Shui Rulan's hand and gave her insignificant strength. "You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.